This is, our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 Election and the Transformation of American Politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show. And Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. "Run, Bobby, run" is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell. You know, we put together the coolest little newsletter every single day, or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, you know, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call it Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Donald Trump is continuing to violate the law, to break the law, to defy the law. I mean, the White House has now instructed Carl Klein, not to testify before Congress. No, you don't. This is the guy who supervised getting a security clearance over the objection of intelligence agencies, over the objection of the FBI, over the objection of the CIA, for Jared Kushner. Similarly, Steve Mnuchin has ordered the Internal Revenue Service to defy the law and not give Trump's tax returns to the House Ways and Means Committee. There's it's extraordinary. The former this Carl Klein. I mean, this whole thing is just Carl Klein is saying, well, I'm receiving subpoenas from two masters, the executive branch and the legislative branch. Actually, he no longer works at the White House. The Washington Post ran a headline on this thing that says, White House instructs official to ignore Democratic subpoena. This is a totally BS headline. There's no such thing as a Democratic subpoena. This is a congressional subpoena. It's a matter of national security. The Washington Post is trying to make it like, oh, this is just a partisan game. No, it's not. This has to do with the nation's security. And telling them no, having all these various people saying, no to Elijah Cummings, no to the House Ways and Means Committee. These are all simple, straightforward violations of the law and naked attempts to obstruct justice. This is the behavior of an authoritarian dictator, a person who doesn't believe in the concept of the Constitution and doesn't believe in the simple concepts of democracy. Elected officials, like, our members of Congress, should not be tolerating this kind of behavior and should, in my opinion, prosecute Trump and his co-conspirators to the fullest extent of the law, including impeachment where appropriate. Last night, Kamala Harris became the second candidate to explicitly call for the impeachment of Donald Trump, or at least the beginning of the hearings. I mean, let's not make this thing too complicated. Nobody, including myself, is suggesting that Donald Trump should be impeached tomorrow morning. The way the process works is that Congress creates, in the Judiciary Committee and Jerry Nadler's committee, you create a hearing into impeachment. And what that does, by the way, is it immediately blocks Trump's ability to issue pardons. Because the Constitution says that the one limit on the president's power to pardon is in the event of impeachments. So you open the impeachment hearings and you start subpoenaing, bringing witnesses before Congress, and you do it out, out in the open where everybody can see it. And then you decide, after you've had your hearings, after the whole nation has seen them, after you have some measure of public opinion as well as your own opinion as members of Congress, you decide whether you're going to vote to impeach him, in which case you send that to the House, and then the House sends that to the Senate, and the Senate holds the trial, or whether you're going to vote to simply censure him, which only requires a simple majority in the House, and once he's censured, that's it. It can go on to the Senate, and the Senate can do it or not. Or you decide not to do anything at all and say, okay, Donald, it's fine what you've been doing, no problem. But if you don't even hold the hearings, you're taking option 3. You're saying, oh, it's all good. So anyhow, there's that. There's also, Louise and I watched 5 hours of CNN last night. And I'm curious if you did too, or if you caught any of the candidates. What did you think? There was one of the candidates who kind of, I'm not going to name names here because I don't want to prejudice your feedback. I'd love to hear from you. But there was one candidate who I was kind of surprised that candidate didn't do as well as I was expecting, frankly. There were a couple of others who did much better than I expected, and I learned things about them that I didn't know that impressed me. I am of the opinion that any of those 5 people that we saw last night would be better than Donald Trump. But, I have my favorites, and I'm guessing you know who those people are. I'm curious what you thought. Was the first up was Amy Klobuchar. She was followed by Elizabeth Warren. She was followed by, as I recall, Kamala Harris, or maybe it was Bernie. Bernie got put into that 9 p.m. Eastern slot where Rachel's show is. So that would be probably the least watched hour on CNN. Although maybe not, I don't know. And then after Bernie came, as I recall, Pete Buttigieg. I might be wrong on the lineup there, but in any case, it was those five. And rather than offering my own opinions, I mean, I'll react to your thoughts and opinions as we talk about it. But I'm interested in what you heard last night. If you watched the CNN town halls, and there were 5 of them, it ran for 5 hours. Each person got a full hour, which is I tip my hat to CNN. I mean, that was a big deal. It was very, very well done. And, what did you see? What did you hear? And how is that altering your opinions? I mean, did any of those candidates say or do something that caused you to go, oh, wow, that's great. I didn't realize that. I'm more enthusiastic about that person. Or did they say things that caused you to say, really? That's all you got? Or, really, you want to go there? This is worth burning up political capital or whatever, I mean, it's just, I had all of those responses, by the way, at various times through the night. And, bottom line is I'm not going to, personally, I'm not going to play the circular firing squad game. Any of the Democratic nominees, and I mean, I'm personally far more in favor of the very progressive ones than I am of the more conservative ones, or even the ones that, back when I was a kid would have been called Republicans. There's at least 3 such people, I think, in the race right now, maybe 4. But even those, even the so-called moderates are people that, frankly, I think would do a much better job than Donald Trump. The fact of the matter is that that's basically what we've been getting from the Democratic Party since '92 is, 1950s Republican positions. And, it hasn't killed us. It hasn't harmed the Republic. It hasn't been as helpful as it could be. And certainly, we haven't had an FDR-type president since LBJ, really, with the Great Society, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, all these kind of things. But which candidates do you think? I mean, Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris are now firmly in the side of, it's time to seriously consider impeaching Donald Trump. In fact, Elizabeth Warren is of the opinion we don't even need the hearings. I mean, she's not saying that, but she's like very, very clear. She read the report, the Mueller report, and it so shocked her. And it is a shocking document. And that she's now just saying, yeah, he should be impeached. The guy's he's not fit for office. And I agree with that. But the process, where you start in the process is you start with, well, we're not really sure. Let's hold the hearings. The fact of the matter is, this is a 450-page document with a couple of hundred pages of footnotes and associated material, not all of which we have, and much of which is about 15% of which has been redacted. But with just what we have and just what we're seeing, this paints a very grim picture of a man in the White House who has no respect for the Constitution, no respect for the rule of law, no respect for law enforcement in the United States, no respect for due process, essentially no respect for democracy or for the office that he holds. And I suppose that shouldn't shock us. I mean, what he's been saying from kind of the get-go. In fact, what he was saying when he was campaigning. All the other Republican candidates were like, okay, he's toast now. He just said, XYZ. He just attacked John McCain. He just fill in the blank, right? There were all these times and where the rest of the Republican candidates were like, wow, everybody's going to see that and know that this guy's unfit for office. But, if you can get Scott Walker to suppress 100,000 plus votes in Wisconsin, you might win Wisconsin by 10,000, 20,000 votes. if you can get Rick Snyder in Michigan to suppress a couple 100,000 votes, and the voting machines in Detroit, which is heavily Democratic, just somehow managed to lose 80,000 votes for president, then you might win Michigan by 10, 15,000 votes. And gee, was that a hack of those voting machines? And if so, by whom? Is anybody looking into that? If you can get, your buddies to promote your candidacy in Pennsylvania, you might win by a small margin there. We know from the Mueller report that Paul Manafort reached out to a Russian oligarch and said, hey, we could use some help in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. How'd that work out? I don't know. I mean, I think we're still learning. But these are, there's a lot going on here. So these two people, Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren have both said, it's time to impeach the guy. I don't think anybody explicitly said, and please correct me if you heard something I didn't, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't think anybody last night explicitly said, no, we shouldn't hold an impeachment hearing. In fact, I don't think there are any Democrats who are taking that position right now, running for president, although I could be wrong. Nancy Pelosi's position is not that we should not hold impeachment hearings. It's that we've got a bunch of hearings happening right now in Ways and Means, in Intelligence, in Oversight, in Judiciary, in each one of these committees. And, let's see what comes out. I mean, this is a starting point, right? So a lot on the table here, a lot to discuss. And in particular, did you learn anything last night if you watched the CNN town halls? It's 18 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the rest of us. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Michael in Snohomish, Washington. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Hey, good morning. I was wondering, if Trump pardons one of his co-conspirators, can that co-conspirator then be compelled to testify other conspirators since jeopardy would no longer apply to them?
Yes. Yeah, a pardon doesn't exempt you from subpoenas, and it doesn't exempt you from future crimes, unless the pardon explicitly says you're exempted from future crimes, which, I'm not even sure it can do.
They wouldn't be able to claim the fifth?
That's a good question for a constitutional lawyer, or actually maybe a criminal defense lawyer. It seems that, if you're claiming the fifth based on the possibility that, let's say you've been charged with, refusing to comply with a subpoena, right? And you're facing time in jail for refusing to go and testify on Capitol Hill. Trump pardons you, so now you can continue to refuse to do the subpoena, and I suppose, and Congress pardons you, and Congress subpoenas you again. Well, geez, I'm not sure how that would play out, Michael.
Huh. Okay. I came up with a question that stumped you.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason it stumped me is, to the best of my knowledge, this has never been adjudicated. I mean, we've never been in this situation before. We've had the executive branch refuse to collaborate or participate in ways with the congressional branch, but not in open defiance of subpoenas, to the best of my knowledge. Now, it's entirely possible that it's happened. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if it happened during the Reagan era and Congress just kind of shrugged their shoulders, although I don't know. Maybe one of our listeners knows, or maybe, if somebody does know, and particularly if they have a link, tweet it to me, right? And I'll check it out. Michael, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you. Diana in West Hartford, Connecticut. Hey, Diana, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I watch your shows and getting used to you. Hi. I have a two-part question for you.
Okay.
If Donald Trump goes through impeachment, One thing is he stripped of his power to do anything? Number two, number one.
Hang on just a minute. I'll answer them one at a time. The only power that Donald Trump loses once Congress creates an impeachment committee in the Judiciary Committee, or an impeachment hearing, rather, the only power he loses is the power to pardon people who might be witnesses to or involved with the impeachable offense.
Okay. All right. Number two, because I know some people watching the previous show, I know like there's been rumors about how he's, with his comments on Iran and how he wants to, we think that he wants to declare war on Iran.
Right.
If he goes through the impeachment process, because I think he probably wants to go for a second term. If he, like with George Bush, like how George Bush, when he was in power, he declared war on, to get what's his name out of power. I forget. Was it Saddam? Not Saddam. Was it Saddam Hussein? I can't remember.
Yeah, Iraq.
And then he got reelected, and a lot of people didn't understand it because he started a war in his first.
Right. No, Trump knows this. I mean, back in 2010, Trump tweeted that any moment now Obama's going to start a war to get himself reelected in 2012. Trump understands that a wartime president has a much higher probability of getting reelected. And, and that's why I think that's why he's pushing for war in both Iran and Venezuela, Diana. Diana, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a heads up, in the second hour of our program today, Cole Stangler is going to be calling in from Paris, talking. He's a contributor to Jacobin and The Nation, and he's going to be talking about what's going on with the Yellow Vest movement there and how they're reacting to billionaires helping fund Notre Dame. It's fascinating. And in our third hour, Paul Gunter, the director of the Reactor Oversight Project at Beyond Nuclear, is going to be with us. There are something like 30 Fukushima-style nuclear reactors in the United States that are all, because they build nuclear reactors near water so that they can cool them down, all the waste heat that's generated by nuclear, the nuclear fission, rather. They build them near water so that they can cool themselves down, and when flooding happens, well, that's what took out Fukushima. It was a flood. It was a tsunami, but it was a flood. And when flooding happens, these nuclear reactors can melt down just like Fukushima did, and we'll hear all about that in the third hour. So anyhow, a lot going on. What did you think about the town halls? What do you think about impeachment? Thomas in Rancho Palos Verdes, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Thomas, your thoughts?
Hey, how's it going, Tom?
Great.
So, I think that there's two candidates in particular that stand out, and I think that Bernie Sanders is one of them. I understand that he's not really a yes or no on the whole impeachment issue. I like that he's just kind of focused on getting his own issues out and winning the campaign.
Right.
I feel like he has a great point, and similar with candidate Andrew Yang, on not getting completely sucked into Trump's energy, and I think that's how you lose a campaign. That was one of the big reasons why Hillary lost, is, giving so much energy to the other side of the campaign.
Yeah,
it
may well be. One of the things that I thought was most shocking last night was how basically, I mean, CNN's producers, the kids in the audience came up with hundreds of questions, and CNN's producers decided which ones would be asked of the candidates, right? And so this was a staged presentation, and the questions were selected by CNN. And for several of the candidates, for Amy Klobuchar, they were largely softball questions. For Elizabeth Warren, they were mostly softball questions. Bernie gets in there, and the woman stands up and tries to get him in a Michael Dukakis moment. You'll remember the main reason I think Michael Dukakis, other than the Willie Horton ad, when the Willie Horton ad was running, Michael Dukakis was asked, he's famously opposed to the death penalty, and he was asked, if your wife Kitty was raped and murdered, would you change your support for the death penalty? And he gave this wonky answer that just made him sound like Casper Milquetoast. And so last night they asked Bernie, you say that even people in jail should be allowed to vote. Would you support voting for the Boston bomber or somebody convicted of rape or sexual assault? And, which is the exact same kind of question there. It's a gotcha question, right? And Bernie handled it well. He said, if we start, the right to vote should be associated with the right to be a citizen. And if we start saying, we're going to take away the right to vote from this group of people in jail, what's next? Well, we're going to take it away from this group of, and he said that's, basically that's what the Republicans are already doing. They're trying to parse who can vote and who can't, and that's a dangerous, slippery slope, which I thought was a brilliant answer, but I was just shocked at some of the questions that Bernie got, how really, really rough-edged they were.
Well, that's the deal with corporate media, right?
Well, it could be, yeah, and you could argue, by the way, that those were setups and attempts to take down Bernie. You could also argue that by giving Bernie really, really tough questions, you're helping him, because those are the kind of questions that are going to be raised in opposition ads, and it gives him an opportunity to rebut them right up front. So it goes either way. Thomas, thanks for the call. I was just surprised to see the difference of the quality. In fact, I think they were so called out on it. Hang on just a second. I'll finish this thought.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
After that question got, thrown at Bernie all over Twitter, people were going, what? And so then they had to make it up and ask that same question of subsequent hosts. It was weird. Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly, they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. CNN is reporting that day after tomorrow, Thursday, Joe Biden is going to announce that he's running for president. There's been all these backstories about him creating videos and rolling out ads and all this other kind of stuff. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting. Dwayne in Warren, Michigan. Hey, Dwayne, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I just love you.
Well, thank you.
I caught the not the debates, the town halls.
Town halls, yeah.
Night. And I didn't get to see quite all of them, but the one I was most blown away with was Kamala Harris.
Yes.
I just love that woman. She just seems so concise and laid things out. And
my opinion of Kamala Harris actually went up substantially as a result of watching her performance last night.
I got to agree with you 100%. I mean, I love Bernie. It was like listening to a Beatles song. It's like, oh, I love that song,
Yeah. No, Bernie did a great job. Elizabeth Warren knocked it out of the park, too.
She did do a very good job, too. I can't disagree with you. We've got an embarrassment of riches, but
I agree.
I'm just going to have to go back with the Kamala Harris one. She just really seemed to really just speak to me. I don't
Dwayne,
know.
did you watch all the way to the end? Did you see Pete Buttigieg? And did you see where what's his name? The host, the CNN host, Anderson Cooper, was repeatedly saying, "Why are your policy positions not on your website? Come on, lay them out for us." And Mayor Pete was like, "Well, we're going to put up some videos or something," but. I think he's following this policy of trying not to be defined by his positions, which is going to be a damn difficult thing to do with a field this large. One of the main ways that you separate people from each other is by their positions. Not, he's trying to run on his biography, but
Right. You know what? I didn't get to watch it that late, but
Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying though, because I have been paying attention to him.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That's my perspective on it.
Yep.
I still love Bernie. Kamala was awesome, and Elizabeth Warren was awesome too. You know, those are my takeaways.
Yeah, there you go. I'm with you. Dwayne, thank you for the call. Benjamin in Mission Viejo, listening on KPFK. Hey, Benjamin, what's up?
Hey, Tom, love your show.
Thanks.
Hey, curious, during the impeachment process for President Nixon, I was just wondering how many senators were originally on board for that? Because I think if you don't have the support of 34 or 33, then that's kind of game over at that point, right?
I don't. Well, first of all, I don't. You know, at what point who was on board with what in the Senate? I don't have that timeline in my head so that I can just pull it up. But what I can tell you is that by about 4 days before Nixon resigned, it was clear to Barry Goldwater anyway that there would be enough Republican votes in the Senate for impeachment, along with all the Democrats, that it was going to happen, and that's the message that he took to Nixon.
Okay.
Where they started out or when they started out, I don't know. What I do know is that the entire process only took about 2 months, and during that 2 months, public opinion went from 19% of the public thinking Nixon should be removed from office to 57% on the day that he resigned. So, you know, the hearings made it obvious to everybody what a criminal this guy was, and that is frankly what I think will happen, assuming the media covers it appropriately. I mean, already you've got the Washington Post now saying that the refusal that Trump is advising people to refuse to submit to Democratic subpoenas. Literally, there is no such thing as a Democratic subpoena. It's a congressional subpoena, and it's an inquiry into the national security of the United States. This having to do with Jared Kushner's security clearance, which senior officials in that office that grants security clearances, and that one whistleblower woman that we all heard from last week have come out and said this is wrong. You know, he never should have gotten a security clearance. This guy has been so corrupted by his international dealings and his billion-dollar debt and all this, you know, that was helped out with the people from the Middle East and all this other stuff. And so, you know, I don't know if it's going to be fair and honest, but that's where we start. Benjamin, thanks for the call. Dan in Dallas, Texas. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Hi, it's an honor to speak with you.
Thank you.
I think that a very important point that needs to be kind of driven home is by all the candidates and all the Democratic talking heads is that impeachment does not necessarily mean removal from office. And so while I am all for impeachment, and you know, all these crimes that the president has committed, they have to be repeated over and over and over and over again because the American public has a very short memory. But
well, it's even worse than that, Dan. Only about 10, 20, maybe 30 million people at the very most in the United States, less than 10% of the population, are getting their news from cable news, which would include Fox, are getting their news from cable news or from talk radio or the venues where you're most likely to hear the you know, an actual analysis of the situation out there. And instead they're catching their news in little 5 and 10 second sound bites, or they're getting it off Facebook, or they're getting it off Twitter, or they're getting it from the 30 minutes in, you know, the newscast in the evening where everything is compacted down to one little tiny story. And so that's
a whole other show for you to do. But at the same time, those points need to be driven home.
But that's why you have to drive those points home, because most people aren't going to catch them.
Right, but as far as impeachment, you know what, I say go for impeachment. But a lot of people believe that impeachment means removal from office.
Right.
And to be honest with you, I am dead set against removal from office, because right now, as we speak, we know what we're dealing with. If the president were to be removed from office and Pence were to become president, God only knows what that wingnut would do. So I think the best thing in my mind, this is my dream. If it comes true, I will be so happy, is we impeach the president, we put one of our own people in office, and the FBI is waiting outside the White House with handcuffs, when the new president is inaugurated.
Yeah, the only thing that would be better is if they were to investigate Pence and impeach them both and make Nancy Pelosi president, because she's third in line. So we'll see. We'll see. Dan, thanks for the call. Jim in Charlottesville, Virginia. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hey, how are you doing, Tom?
Good. What's on your mind?
Good. First-time caller.
Thank you.
Love you after the Stephanie Miller show. Just wondering, I mean, if Trump has this, I'm hearing rumors about Trump having this war in his back pocket with Iran and blowing up the Middle East.
And another one in Venezuela, yeah.
Yeah. Is it not, if he's under impeachment, if I understand right, he cannot wage war with anybody.
Sure he can.
During that.
No, he can do whatever he wants. Now, in theory, he can't wage war against anybody without Congress declaring it. But that theory kind of went away in the 60s with the Vietnam War, and it hasn't come back.
Right. The War Powers Act got
right.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
that was in the 70s, but yes.
Yeah, but so he can still do what he wants, even if he's under impeachment.
Yeah, the only thing that an impeachment inquiry or even an actual impeachment in the House of Representatives would prevent him from doing is pardoning anybody who might be a witness against him in an impeachment hearing. In order to prevent them from testifying against him. He can't do that. But that, I mean, because the Constitution says, impeachment, the power of the president to pardon, except in cases of impeachment, is otherwise pretty much absolute. But that's the only power that he would lose, is the power to pardon. And it would be a very narrowly subscribed piece of it. Jim, thank you for the call. Lucas in San Francisco. Hey, Lucas, what's on your mind?
Hey, good day. First-time caller.
Thank you.
Listen to your show a lot. The question is this. It seems to me, and this is your opinion question, Trump has done 10 times more minimum than Nixon. Had Nixon not resigned, in other words, if Nixon didn't, chose to just salve it out, what would have happened?
He would have been convicted. He would have been impeached in the House and convicted in the Senate. The votes were already there. People were already on the record. And then he would have been removed from office and Jerry Ford would have become president. So he decided, and in the process, by the way, of the impeachment and the trial, the details of his crimes would have been made far more public than they already were, which is why he decided to resign.
But when you look at Trump's, his is not only public, it's even worse.
Right, but Trump, in the case of Trump right now, you don't have enough votes in the Senate for impeachment. There's not a single Republican who so far has come out and said that he or she would vote in favor of impeachment. And the closest we've gotten to that is Mitt Romney saying that he was, quote, horrified by what was in the Mueller report.
So why push forward on the impeachment? It seems like the Democrats have a lot of other things on their plate that they can go take care of than.
Your point is well taken, Lucas. And if once you open an impeachment hearing in the House of Representatives, that means you're going to impeach, I would agree with you, because the votes aren't there in the Senate. But the whole point is, once you open an impeachment hearing in the House, you acquire a whole bunch of powers that are generally just powers for the judiciary. For yourself, the House could, even enforce its own subpoenas. I mean, there are things that you can do that you can't do just as a normal member of Congress, because now it's a judicial proceeding. It's an impeachment trial or an impeachment hearing. Number one. Number two, you bring all these witnesses forward, and the whole country watches what's going on, which is what happened during Watergate. And when this started, 2 months before Nixon resigned, 19% of the American public thought Nixon should resign. After 2 months of hearings, 57% of the American public thought Nixon should resign. They never actually held a vote on whether to impeach Nixon, to the best of my knowledge. I might be wrong on that because there were actual articles drawn up, but I'm pretty sure they never actually held that vote. And so it never even got to the Senate, or if they did hold the vote in the House, the Senate certainly didn't vote on it because Nixon resigned. So the process of starting the hearings is also the process of changing public opinion. And the process of changing public opinion is what will lead to some Republicans saying, okay, well, it's time to throw this guy overboard.
Right. So it is an upside to the impeachment. It's a strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like, Congress tomorrow gets together and says, okay, we're just going to say impeach the guy. No, they get together, they open an impeachment hearing. That begins a whole brand new constitutional process. Impeachment is in the Constitution, and it adds powers to the House of Representatives and the Senate that they don't otherwise have. And then and it takes power away from the president. It eliminates his power to pardon people who might be co-conspirators in crimes that he could be impeached for. So I think it's a good start. Lucas, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 46 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Mark in San Jose. Hey, Mark, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I just want to segue to your whole public with Jerry Nadler. He's going to get Don McGovern with documents, and Barry and Mueller is starting an impeachment.
Is your question, is the subpoena to Don McGahn the beginning of an impeachment inquiry? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm just stating, along with your segue point, and that they need to have this in public. And I think when they get McGahn and Brad, Burr and Mueller, that'll do it. And the way I see it, Tom, is there's no purity tests. It's the USA versus the world's worst criminals. So with your town hall, I didn't watch it because it was 5 hours, and I thought, well, this is kind of useless.
Yeah.
I'll accept any one of these Democrats, and as I suggested, I've been watching you since Air America days, Tom, and I'm a $1,000 contributor, but I really would like the Democrats to run as a team.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kamala Harris can be the the Attorney General, or maybe, obviously filling in the spots. So thank you for taking that, Tom.
Yeah, that whole idea of a shadow government, which is something that they actually do in the UK and some other European countries, where the opposition forms its own essentially shadow cabinet and says, okay, this is this person would have been the Secretary of Defense, this person would have been the Secretary of the Interior, whatever. And then whenever one of the real Secretary of Defense does something, the shadow Secretary of Defense comes out and says, well, that was crazy, or this is how I would have done it. I mean, I think that's kind of a cool thing.
And then comparing them to, like you said, if there was a flesh department, these Republicans would have a flesh eating department.
Yeah, exactly. So exactly.
So if you compare, Elizabeth Warren giving money to refunding money to all the people in this country, to Mnuchin closing. Kicking out old people out of their homes. Great contrast.
Yeah, Mnuchin, the foreclosure king. Amen. Mark, thank you. Thank you for that. Bruce in Fort Collins, Colorado, listening on TuneIn. Hey, Bruce, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. Sure. Not too often you get a non-hostile lifetime Republican and Reagan supporter, but that's me.
Okay.
This guy's a cancer on my party, and I want him gone.
Good.
I'm driven crazy by the people who say, oh, we can't impeach because the Senate, there's not enough votes in the Senate to convict him.
Right.
Imagine if a district attorney said, yeah, this guy killed 18 people, but he's a really popular guy in town. I don't think I could get a jury to convict him, so I might as well let him walk. Hope he doesn't do it again.
Right. Or, this guy might have killed 18 people, but it hasn't been reported in the media. The jury pool doesn't even know about it, so they probably won't vote to convict, so why bother having a trial?
Yeah, you don't prosecute because you think you can win. You prosecute because it's the right thing to do.
Amen. Bruce, I completely agree with you. And thanks for being a non-hostile Republican. It's Reagan Republican. It's nice to hear from you. I hope one of these days you can call and we can have a non-hostile conversation about policy. Bruce, thanks so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. And thanks for listening to TuneIn. We'll be right back. It's coming up on about 9 minutes before the hour. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Tom in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I watched all 5 hours, and I really have been following Mayor Pete. But I keep wondering when somebody is going to ask him about his work with McKinsey and Company. I read his biography, and he makes light of those 3 years and kind of glosses over the details. And I think it might be his Achilles heel. I really like him. I'm impressed with his story, his approach. But I think that they need to, the media is falling down on asking him important question about his career.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that McKinsey is the same consulting company that John, I'm drawing a blank on his last name, Sean is tracking it down here, John Perkins. Thank you, Sean. The guy who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman. That, you know, although I may be wrong, but I believe that that's the case. And that, you know, we'll see what happens. I'm guessing that question will be answered eventually, Tom.
Well, why do you think that the media is not asking that question? They're just going they just ask him endlessly about his faith and his service and all that. And yet this is a 3-year, this is a global mega power that, has a very iffy reputation. I mean, they do good stuff and they do bad stuff. So I think the media is falling down, but it will come out eventually, and they need to be ready.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I'm curious too. Tom, thank you for the call.
I also thought that Kamala dodged a bunch of questions. She kept saying this is a good topic for a conversation, but she didn't really have a position, and that disappointed me.
Yeah, that's what she said about reparations specifically. There was something else that she was talking about that, we need to have a conversation.
Anyway, great show. First-time caller. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for calling in and for watching the program. Robbie in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robbie, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Yeah, hey, Tom. I just wanted to talk briefly about a lot of people are concerned about the impeachment. I think it's kind of we got to focus on getting Trump out, and that's not what that's going to do. But I wanted to
I think it needs to go beyond that, Robbie. We need to get control of the Senate. Mitch McConnell yesterday said that if he's the majority leader...
Well, my point was impeachment's not going to do any of that. But what I wanted to bring up, though, is you said that there was voter suppression in pretty much Arizona. Scott Walker. They did that throughout the entire election in 2016, voter suppression. Do you remember the shenanigans in Arizona?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now,
it was 20. I think it was 26 states that they identified that had heavy levels of voter suppression. There were like 7 or 8 of them that kind of led the pack. But yeah.
So if there is voter suppression going on, which was coordinated, to help that side. Also, you mentioned that they were throwing hardballs at Bernie, and when they throw hardballs at Bernie, is that not election interference? I mean, what we are witnessing is actual election interference by the media establishment. But somehow or another, we're concerned about Russia when our own government is actually interfering with the voting machines. You brought that up earlier, but I'm just concerned about why we aren't paying attention to our own government elections interference.
Yeah. It's not government. It's partisan politics. What you're seeing, the voter suppression is being promoted by Republicans. Yeah, Republicans in power, in political power. Yeah, I'll give you that. And the whole voting machine thing is an abomination, as is the voter suppression. And they're ramping it up, by the way. This is an incredible story because Republicans basically can only win by cheating. Joan McCarter over on Daily Kos. In Texas, they're looking at making a mistake on a voter registration form a felony. This would be something like one wrong digit on your zip code, and you're looking at 5 years in prison in Texas if you register to vote. Criminal penalties, including jail time for voter registration errors or casting an ineligible ballot. Arizona is trying to make early voting more complicated. Tennessee lawmakers are considering discouraging voter registration groups by creating fines for submitting incomplete forms. This is something they did down in Florida. It's why the League of Women Voters, it wasn't just fines, it was also jail time. Why the League of Women Voters left Florida. They no longer register people to vote in Florida. Texas and Arizona look like they're at the forefront of this, and it's because in both those states, in the last election, the 2018 election, Democrats picked up seats, Kyrsten Sinema in Arizona, in the Senate in particular, and they're freaked out, and they know that the only way that they can win is by cheating, and so they're aggressively increasing their cheating. Robbie, I share your concern, and it's something I agree we do need to be talking about more. Will in Santa Barbara. Hey, Will, what's up? Will in Santa Barbara? Okay, Jim in Poway, California. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, this is Jim, and I'm by no means a young person. I'm 73, but I'll tell you what, the young people I talk to, the consensus is unless we do something in a direction of impeachment or at least start the process, the consensus is that what's the point of voting? So as much as I'm not a big impeachment guy, I think that for the next generation of voters, which is a fantastic group of people, look at the turnout. I think that's something we need to do.
I agree, and not only that, Donald Trump has already declared that he's going to promote a counter narrative. He's going to start investigating the investigators. He's declaring that he won. He's going to declare that he has already declared that there's a conspiracy in the deep state to take him down. He says that he has said in public that there was a coup. I mean, this is serious and dangerous language. And in the absence of an impeachment inquiry, his narrative is absolutely going to win. He's going to hold the day, and we can't let that happen either. Jim, I'm with you. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be back. We're going to check in here at the top of the hour with Cole Stangler in Paris. Find out what's going on there. We'll continue this conversation too.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Reading today from Justin Frank, Dr. Justin Frank's book, Trump on the Couch, Inside the Mind of the President. He's the guy who wrote Bush on the Couch and Obama on the Couch. He's a psychiatrist and professor of psychiatry in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And the book just came out. This is from the introduction. There's no question that Trump is mentally unfit in ways that make him psychologically unsuited for the presidency. That in itself is a truly alarming turn of events. And I'd write the entire book in all caps if I thought that would better convey the sense of urgency with which it is written and should be read. Any number of troubling mental illness diagnoses and character evaluations can be and have been accurately applied to Trump. Both can vary from analyst to analyst, however, without necessarily sacrificing any of the accuracy. More to the point, the true value of a diagnosis is to determine an appropriate course of treatment. And there's no indication that any sort of treatment is a viable option. Trump on the Couch then seeks not simply to make the case that Trump is not well, but rather to show how he is unwell in ways that would have been of particular interest to the applied psychoanalysts whose investigation likely preceded our own, the Russians, and perhaps even their American allies or counterparts, who in the long tradition of intelligence gathering examined Trump's psyche and found an opportunity for exploitation. Trump's presidency caps a lifetime of dysfunction and disorder that is not likely to be healed while he is in office, just as Trump's ascendancy among voters gives expression to long-standing trends in the American electorate's psyche that are not going to be easily addressed. However, if we can identify certain aspects of these disorders and trends that may have contributed to Trump and his voters fusing into a shared belief system, then we have a better chance of fostering the kind of honest cultural discussion that will be necessary in order to contain and repair the damage that has already been done. Understanding Trump calls for a consideration of his psychodynamics almost certainly more rigorous than he has ever embarked upon on his own. Trump dismissed psychotherapy as a crutch in his 2004 Playboy interview. Years later, talking to biographer Michael D'Antonio, he described in greater detail a generalized aversion to introspection beyond the therapeutic setting. Quote, "I don't like to analyze myself because I might not like what I see," he told D'Antonio. "I don't like to analyze myself. I don't like to think too much about the past," end of quote. Even armed with a detailed family history, we can't capture Trump in action with only the tools of applied psychoanalysis. Like some of the most disturbed patients I've worked with, Trump is so erratic, constantly changing the topic, elevating the stakes, and raising the volume, that one doesn't know what to expect from him next. It's hard to imagine him in treatment. Even as the subject of an applied psychoanalytical investigation, he behaves like a patient who is simultaneously banging in the consulting room window, rattling on its door, ringing the phone, and texting or tweeting his demands for attention. Trump presents so many troubling affects that it's hard to remember them all. In the final weeks of the first year of Trump's presidency, Michael Wolff and David K. Johnston published accounts of the Trump White House that present a president with a startling number of disturbing characteristics. Any one of these demonstrable and suspected traits would raise calls for a psychoanalytic investigation if it was done on a layperson. In a president, in aggregate, they are truly cause for alarm. The list of worrisome, evident, and alleged attributes that emerge in these and other portraits is long. Narcissist, liar, racist, sexist, adulterer, baby, hypocrite, chiseler, tax cheat, outlaw, psychopath, paranoid, fraud, ignorant, vengeful, delusional, arrogant, greedy, contemptuous, unsympathetic, learning disabled, cruel, obstructor of justice, threat to the Constitution, traitor. The list is so long that it can be overwhelming. It's a challenge to remember the beginning by the time you make it to the end. There are times when I wish someone would help us remember all the troubling aspects of Trump's character and behavior, past and present, in a way that would encourage recognition of the totality of his pathology, rather than its component parts, which individually cause alarm before being temporarily forgotten when the next emergency presents itself. As an applied psychoanalyst, my task is not only to appreciate the full list, but also to ignore the big picture and focus on a single pathology at a time. Practitioners of applied psychoanalysis approach their subject as both theoretician and clinician. The theoretician endeavors to piece things together, to figure things out, while the clinician tries to approach each session capable of being surprised, as if his mind were a blank slate. The analysis in the following pages aspires to accomplish both goals: reviewing Trump's record with a clinician's eye, preparing to be surprised by the unexpected observation, and assembling these findings into a more comprehensive portrait. The image of hypothetical patient Trump rattling the consulting room door and banging on the window reminds us that President Trump doesn't want us to see the entire list at once. Not only that, but patients I've treated who are reminiscent of Trump cannot tolerate being inside the consulting room either. They leave my office whenever they feel unable to think their way through an anxiety-provoking interpretation, much the way Trump leaves press briefings when the questions get too close. Trump on the Couch by Justin Frank. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Last night, CNN did 5 back-to-back hours, of candidates running for president on the Democratic side. Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar. Actually, they started with Amy. And, we've been talking over the last hour of what did you think of that? And, continuing our conversation largely from yesterday about the impeachment hearings and those proceedings. So we'll continue that conversation. But first, I wanted to get an update from France about what's going on there. The Yellow Vest movement is, I think, in many ways, the French version of what might happen in the United States if the left did a Tea Party kind of thing. Although maybe Cole Stangler would disagree with me on that. I'd love to get his thoughts on it. And we can right now, in fact. Cole is on the line with us. His website, Cole Stangler, ColeStangler.com. You can tweet him also at Cole Stangler. Cole, welcome, and thanks for giving us a shout from Paris today. How's everything there?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me, Tom.
My pleasure. I understand that the Yellow Vest movement has been protesting the billionaires rebuilding Notre Dame, or Notre Dame. This has to be more complex than just that. What's happening with that movement?
Yeah, the most recent weekend here has been the 23rd straight weekend of these Yellow Vest protests, which is pretty remarkable. Protests started back in November of last year. They've now gone on, just had Act 23 and presumably another protest coming up in the following weekend. And this is all ahead of May 1st, which is Workers' Day. And we could expect a pretty large turnout there of both unions and probably the Yellow Vests as well. Now, it is important to note as well that in terms of the size of the protests, they have declined in a pretty substantial way, I would say. The support as well has declined a little bit. At the beginning of the protest, we had about 70% support in the polls in support of the movement. And now it's down to about 50%, about half the country. But I still think that's a significant number in France when you look at the popularity of major political figures, whether that's Emmanuel Macron, whether that's the far right, the National Rally Party led by Marine Le Pen, whether it's the mainstream right-wing party. 50% support in France is a non-negligible figure. And sure. I think it speaks to how people continue to identify with the Yellow Vest protests, or at the very least have sympathy for this movement, which has really crystallized a lot of the opposition to Emmanuel Macron and frustrations that people have had with the general trajectory of French politics for the last couple of decades, which that is ignoring the plight of working people, not investing enough in public services, and enacting policies that are designed to curry favor with the rich at the expense of the rest of the population. So,
Macron has been pushing basically neoliberalism, good old generic neoliberalism.
Yeah, we've seen this. I think I've talked about this before on your program, but, his very first budget in office, Emmanuel Macron goes in and implements this massive tax cut for the super rich. And when I say the super rich, that really is the super rich, people making over people with 1.3 million euros in assets. The wealth tax that used to exist in France, Macron repealed that or put it so that it applies only to real estate assets. In any case, a very significant tax cut for the wealthiest fraction of French society. And that was really the signal for the rest of his policies.
So speaking to the actual the Yellow Vest movement, I know, and I was kind of close to this, and so it was painful to watch. With the Occupy movement in the United States, that emerged as a consequence of the financial excesses and all this sort of thing. In New York City, good chunks of that Occupy movement got co-opted by the Bobavakian cult, basically, this political cult that operates under all kinds of different names. There were parts of the Occupy movement that were also, I know in Washington, D.C., one group that was basically co-opted by the, what's his name? The Lynn and LaRouche bunch, And it was like there were all these kind of fringe groups that have identified themselves as lefties. I mean, Bobavakian, that's the Revolutionary Communist Party, that basically took over in a relatively egalitarian movement here in the United States because it was leaderless, because or you could say that made it easier to take over. Is anything like that happening in France with the Yellow Vest movement?
Yeah, one of the things about the LS movement, as you point out, is certainly it's extremely decentralized. It really depends on the location you're in. You can have the makeup of a group in say, the northeast of Paris can be very different from the makeup of a group in southwestern France or in the north of France, which is, more, the historic mining areas of the country that actually have a lot in common with West Virginia and parts of the U.S. In any case, the movement does vary a lot. And so, you do see some kind of fringe, radical, some far right involvement. But I would say overall, the movement has maintained its integrity. There are trade unionists that are involved more in certain parts of the country. There are left-wing activists that are more involved in certain parts of the country. So it really depends on what you're looking at. And I think it depends on, and it really depends on the city, is really the answer to the question.
Yeah. So tell me about the LFS movement's response to the Notre Dame fire.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that happened, and in some ways for me, I think I tweeted this or something to this effect, but this horrible tragedy that happened at Notre Dame, I think everyone in the country was pretty shocked looking at these images, going to sleep not knowing if they were going to see the cathedral the next morning. And so it was a pretty traumatic moment, especially for all the history and the architectural marvel that is the cathedral. But in some ways, what was refreshing to me was the very next morning when you saw these donations that were coming in from some of France's wealthiest families, the Arnault family, which owns the LMVH luxury brand, the Pinault family, which owns another luxury brand holding company. These donations started pouring in, and I think now they're over 1 billion euros has been promised by these rich families. There was already criticism the next morning about these families ostensibly using the tragedy of Notre Dame to reduce their tax bill, because the next morning you had supporters of these families saying, it would be nice if the donations that they would be giving would be taxed less than at the current rate, and therefore reduce their tax bill. And so we saw this offensive from supporters of the families and immediate backlash and criticism from the rest of from a lot of people in France, and eventually I think we've reached the point now where those donations are going to just be regular donations, and they're not going to be provide any tax advantages. So what I was saying was it was actually refreshing in some ways to see the backlash in France, to say, what, this is upsetting, it's a tragic moment, but at the same time this shouldn't be used by people to advance their policy aims. And in fact, now the campaign for the European Parliament elections that are coming up at the end of May, from May 23rd to 26th, elections across Europe, that campaign was put on pause a little bit following the fire at Notre Dame, and we've seen right now this week so far the fury and the criticism and the electricity of the campaign is back and running again, and parties are once again criticizing each other. And that little brief moment of national unity was a flicker, and we're back to the regular grind of French politics, which is very people like to debate a lot and criticize each other.
No, I get that. Pulling back a little bit and looking at all of Europe, we see in countries like Poland and Hungary, right-wing governments taking power, authoritarian governments, nationalist governments, racist, essentially, governments. On the other hand, in Portugal, for example, you've got a very progressive government that defied the European Union's, the whole Eurozone thing, and said, no, we are going to engage in deficit spending to get ourselves out of a recession, and it actually worked. And, kind of giving a lie to the EU's neoliberal policies, frankly, that took down, in my opinion, Spain and Greece over the last decade. We've got this spectrum of political perspectives inside the European Union, from well, I've identified them, I guess. How is that playing out, not just in France but across Europe? What direction do you see the continent moving?
Yeah, it's a tough question, because I think it really depends on the national context. As you pointed out, in Portugal you have a coalition left-wing government that's in power. In the UK, with I don't know if we should include the UK as part of the discussion, although presumably for at least the next few months they are. The UK has its own specific context, France as well. In Spain, which was a flicker or Spain was certainly seen as a source of hope for a lot of people on the left. Around the same time as Syriza in Greece took power on their anti-austerity agenda. Spain obviously has Podemos, the left populist political party, And polls there are not looking very favorable for Podemos, although the socialists seem to be able to conserve their majority. But Spain seems to be a country that, if at least the radical left or the populist left or Podemos doesn't seem to be on the verge of taking power, at least the center left is with the socialists. But other than Spain, it's kind of a dark picture if you look at some of the major economies and the major countries in Europe. So if you look at France, if you look at Italy and Germany, the three biggest countries in the EU in terms of both population and the economy, these are countries where the debate, and I wrote about this in a recent piece for Commonweal magazine, the debate seems, depressingly kind of stuck between this, on the one hand, defending the current order of the European Union with all of the harmful economic policies that implies on the one hand, and on the other hand, this kind of far-right dominated xenophobic populism. In France, that's the National Rally Party, the former National Front. In Germany, you have the AfD. In Italy, you have the Lega Party, which is now in a coalition government. So
and Steve Bannon is getting his fingers into all of these, is he not?
He is, and I actually did report on that as well for a piece in a French outlet that came out a few weeks ago. And the interesting thing about Bannon's outfit there, and you can find this reported in English as well, is Bannon launched this movement, which he called the Movement. That's the name of the group. He formed with a small party in Belgium. And the idea was they were going to be spending money and providing polling assistance and doing data analysis for all these far-right populist parties across Europe. So the three parties I mentioned, and the AfD in Germany, National Rally in France, Lega in Italy. So this huge momentum around the start of the movement, and it turns out that actually there are real legal barriers to being able to provide foreign assistance, at least of that scope, in a lot of the European countries. So
that's interesting.
The movement does seem to be blocked, at least the way it was. It won't be able to achieve a lot of the objectives it set out from the beginning. But the far right is still on the ascendant, and it's a very frightening and kind of dark climate here. So hopefully things will improve over the next few months.
Hopefully. Well, keep us up to date, Cole.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great talking with you. Cole Stangler, the Paris-based journalist and contributor to The Nation and Jacobin, among others. ColeStangler.com is the website. You can tweet him at Cole Stangler. Cole, thanks a lot. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. And welcome back. Gary, watching Free Speech TV in Huntington, West Virginia. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today? Gary? Oh, my. Okay. Louise, Gary's on line 1, if you want to check that out. Steve in Topanga, California, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just thought, why couldn't Jerry Nadler subpoena the commissioner of the IRS, bring him before the committee, and have him bring Trump's tax returns? And if he doesn't do it, or if he shows up, he could hold him in contempt and put him in jail right there.
He could.
I think
that's next up.
They got to play hardball.
I agree. I agree. Trump is already playing hardball. He's talking about treason. He's talking. I mean, exactly. He's using the language of war, and the Democrats can't be. I'm sorry, you got to bring a chainsaw to a knife fight, or at least a knife, right?
Exactly. Last thing I want to say is I thought Elizabeth Warren was great.
Yeah.
And that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I thought Elizabeth Warren really performed well last night. I thought Bernie did too. It's the issues are the issues. Michael in Winter Haven, Florida. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hi, Tom. This was brought up before as far as the 2020 election is concerned, but what if Trump is impeached and convicted, but physically refuses to leave the White House? And would John Roberts automatically swear in Mike Pence? And would we have two presidents? I'm kind of confused on that one.
I think that John Roberts is going to do what the Constitution says, and I think it's extremely unlikely Trump will refuse to leave the White House. I know that, in the last election, apparently it was the voice of Russia, who knows, but, it came through WikiLeaks. was saying to the Trump campaign and maybe to Trump himself, because everybody expected him to lose, including Trump. He didn't even have a victory speech written. Was saying, hey, when you lose, start, yelling and screaming about voter fraud and election fraud and all this kind of stuff, and refuse to accept the results of the election. And this, of course, would make Hillary Clinton look like an illegitimate president for the next 4 years, and it'll hurt her and her ability to do her agenda. I mean, they didn't fill in all the blanks like I just did, but basically that's what they were saying. And I think it's entirely possible that if Trump loses the election in 2020, he's going to be a sore loser. He's going to yell and scream like that. You're going to have a whole conspiracy theory about it. I mean, there are still people who think that Jack Kennedy only won in 1960 because Mayor Daley was throwing voting machines in the Chicago River or Lake Michigan or something or whatever, when it turns out that even if Chicago had gone entirely for Richard Nixon, or Illinois had gone entirely for Richard Nixon, Jack Kennedy still would have won the White House. So, these conspiracy theories die hard, right? They don't go down easily. And Trump is...
I know Bill Maher brings it up a lot in the show, and he's very worried about it. And I kind of listen to him, so I'm a little worried too. But
that Trump might not leave office.
Yeah, in 2020, he mostly he won't walk out of the White House, and maybe he'll have his goons like Buzz Windrop in that book, and it's just a little worrying.
If the United States is going to go down the road that Sinclair Lewis laid out, and it can't happen here, that's when it will happen. I put it at about a 5% chance, but the fact that it's higher than zero it should be making us all a little nervous. Michael, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back with more of the program. Stick around. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And welcome back. We're continuing our conversation. Sorry about the book report. I'm not sure. We're trying to figure out how that got in there. But anyhow, welcome back. We're continuing our conversation here. Jeremy in Glendora, California. Hey, Jeremy, what's on your mind today?
To the town halls. Actually, I got a few things that I want to comment about, so please give me a chance. With regard to the town hall, I thought that the weak point in Elizabeth Warren is super sharp, but again, her weird answers, like with regard to her voter registration as a Republican as recently as the 90s, and her answer regarding that was so akin to her Native American claims from the past. It's like...
I thought it sounded just truthful. I wasn't paying attention to politics back then.
Dude, come on. When you check the box what you're doing. I mean, to act like it doesn't matter.
It doesn't. Jeremy, I'm sorry. It really doesn't matter to me if she was registered as a Republican. Raleigh in Hinsdale, Illinois. Hey, Raleigh, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First-time caller, long-time listener.
Thank you.
In fact, I listen to MSNBC every day, and I hope someday you'll be on it. I think you could be an addition. Say, I wanted to tell you about something that happened this morning. I don't know if you heard this or not, but Jared Kushner came on TV, a rare speech, and he was bashing the Mueller report.
Hang on just a second, Raleigh. Your phone is going in and out. Who was on TV?
Jared Kushner.
Oh, Jared Kushner, okay.
Yeah,
Raleigh, I'm sorry, your phone keeps falling apart. I'm going to put you on hold. Louise, he's on line 4 if you want to see if Raleigh's phone, or maybe you can call back or whatever. Will in Santa Barbara, California. Hey, Will, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I just want to say the town hall last night, I really loved Elizabeth Warren. I think she confirmed for me that I'm happy to vote for her, even as a diehard Bernie supporter.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to remark, though, on the questions, and it was very strange to me that a bunch of elite Harvard students were supposedly representing New Hampshire college kids.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think that they were drawing from the region in terms of, letting people come in. I mean, New Hampshire, I used to live in New Hampshire. It's just
Right.
down the road from Boston, frankly. It's like,
Well, it's an hour away. It's a school night. I mean,
yeah.
let's,
But, I think that was...
CNN tipped the scales here.
Yeah, I don't think that they tipped the scales so much in choosing who was going to be there, as much as they tipped the scales. Say what? Okay, as much as I think that they tipped the scales by arguing that we should be in a break, shouldn't we, Sean? We're in a break. Oh, we're in a break. Okay, that they tipped the scales by the questions that they chose. So, Will, I got to run. Okay, we're gonna be back in just a minute. We've got something weird going on with our automation system that we've got to restart. So stick around. For the Thom Hartmann Book Club, our book today is How Wealth Rules the World, Saving Our Communities and Freedoms from the Dictatorship of Property by Ben G. Price, with a blurb on the back from some guy named Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction, One Right to Rule Them All, The Dark Side of Property. Let's get it out in the open. The United States of America, nations that emulate its governing principles, are governed by a dictatorship of property. Is that plutocracy? Sure, but it goes deeper than that. The U.S. Constitution, as it was written and later interpreted by the Supreme Court, hijacked democratic rights that American revolutionaries thought they had won. The Federalists developed a whole system of law that serves the interests of wealth. Elements of that system include the following: state constitutions untethered from their revolutionary moorings, international trade agreements that supersede local, state, and federal laws, regulations administered by an unrepresentative bureaucracy, political parties that gerrymander legislative districts so that they can choose their voters rather than allowing voters to choose their representatives, corporate property that the Supreme Court has declared to be persons with Bill of Rights protections, federal and state statutes that privatize public governance and prohibit democratic limits on the uses of private fortunes, and local governments declared to be property of the state and made unavailable to communities for municipal lawmaking. We live deep within an undemocratic matrix of law that masquerades as a democratic republic while it legalizes an aristocracy of wealth. The U.S. Constitution was written by men who came from a uniformly privileged class. Charles Beard argued this point in his book, An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. Beard analyzed the economic interests of those who met in secret to overturn the Articles of Confederation and concluded that the Federalists were motivated by economic self-interest to establish a form of government that would protect their wealth against an excess of democracy, as Alexander Hamilton put it. The Federalists who replaced the Articles with the U.S. Constitution were not fully aligned with the liberating agenda of commoners who risked their lives to throw off the hierarchical chains of Great Britain. They were wealthy men educated in British law with opinions that harmonized with aristocratic sentiments. The authors of the U.S. Constitution are often called the Founding Fathers. Popular history lumps the Federalist counter-revolutionaries in with the likes of Thomas Paine, who with his firebrand writings against monarchy, nobility, and special privilege for the few, inspired the people to demand independence. Popular culture counts the Federalists as American revolutionaries no less fervent for liberty than the men whose ideas of leveling the social class system inspired American farmers and day laborers to pick up their muskets and take on the redcoats. This conflation of the Federalist counter-revolutionaries with those whose spirit of '76 is reflected in the Declaration of Independence and absent from the U.S. Constitution is a troubling reminder that popular history too often preserves false memories. What's the evidence that the Federalists intended a Constitution that weaponizes law to protect the accumulation of property and raise wealth and out of reach of public governance? Well, to begin with, their own words were recorded in Philadelphia in 1787 by James Madison and Robert Yates. Damningly, that record was held secret until every delegate to the clandestine conclave had died, and the Constitution they wrote had been the law of the land for 2 generations. We have that evidence, and it tells the tale I'll share in Chapter 2. We also have the product of their cleverness to consider. The Federalists established a quasi-monarchical judiciary. Politically appointed judges wielded the power to veto any legislation that departs from the Federalists' original intent, to protect wealthy accumulation from democratic oversight. We have the arguments of the anti-federalists who called out the would-be American aristocrats for betraying the revolution. If not for them, we would not have the first 10 amendments to the Federalist document, the Bill of Rights, which many identify as the soul of the U.S. Constitution. More immediate evidence that the original intent of the U.S. Constitution was to immunize possession of unearned property from public regulation can be found in the antisocial way the document is interpreted by the courts and how it operates on society today. Here's my argument in a nutshell. We are faced with social, political, and environmental problems that resist resolution because law empowers a wealthy minority to govern based on priorities often at odds with the general welfare. The Constitution, and its interpretation by the courts, amounts to an arsenal of weaponized law able to deliver special privileges to a propertied class. Certain legal mechanisms let those seeking to profit at the public expense block policies that compete with their interests. These legal doctrines operate by a 2-step process. First, they remove democratic rights from the public sphere and deposit them in concentrated accumulations of property. The oddity of attaching legal rights to property itself rather than to people roared into public consciousness with the Supreme Court's 2010 Citizens United ruling that affirmed corporate property's personhood and free speech rights. Although the ruling shocked the conscience of average Americans, it was not the first time the court had vested civil rights within inert property. Nor were corporations the first type of property to be given legal rights. The second step is for property imbued with rights to deliver those rights as an extra layer of legal privilege to the property owner. When civil and human rights are deposited in property, that property is placed beyond the authority of the people to govern how it is used by its owner. This nullifies the majority's ability to decide directly or through elected representatives what public policy will be. As a result, we aren't allowed to resolve issues of immediate concern to every community. Even when we understand what needs to be done, we're often blocked. And then he goes through the whole list. Benji Price wrote, How Wealth Rules the World.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. 34 minutes past the hour. John in San Francisco, listening to Real Talk 910. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks. And I want to give a shout out to Louise. She's awesome. And I totally agree with her concept. I think you said a couple times that she thought that the South, we should never have taken back the South after the Civil War had been ended. Wasn't that
Well, it was rather that Lincoln shouldn't have fought the war. He should have said, okay, guys, see you later. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I totally
same
agree with
effect.
that. Anyway, on that note, I'm suggesting, I want to get your thoughts on Joe Biden running as a Republican, because it's a wide open field. He'd never have to apologize for any of his misdeeds in the past. And there's lots of money to scoop up. And it would give, the ruling class Democrats a place to go, because we know they're dying to put their finger on the scale.
John, Joe Biden is going to probably tomorrow or the next day, they're reporting Thursday, he's going to announce that he's running as a Democrat. I mean, come on. He was the Democratic vice president. He was a Democratic senator.
We got plenty of time, and it's a wide open field. There's only 2 guys running in the Republicans, and they're in big need of someone with some sort of semblance of law and order.
Oh, so you mean I took that to mean that you were taking a cheap shot at Joe Biden for some of his more conservative policies, but what you're suggesting is that somebody of national stature should step up, other than Bill Weld, should step up and take a serious shot at the Republican primary, at going after Trump in a primary.
Absolutely. That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah. Well, I think it should be a Republican. I think it should be Mitt Romney. It should be or some Republican who has gravitas and a national reputation and all that kind of stuff. I don't think it should be Joe Biden or any other Democrat.
I don't think that. I think the rules don't apply anymore, just based on the last couple of years. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's certainly true. But there still are limits. Joe Biden wants to be the Democratic president of the United States, and there's a chance that he will be. So
we used to say to our kids, what do you want? You don't always get.
Yeah, there you go. John, thanks for the call. Brent in Hilliard, Ohio. Hey, Brent, what's on your mind? You had some thoughts on the 5-hour town hall marathon last night on CNN?
I did. I listened to the whole thing, and so surprisingly, I came away and don't think that very many of them did themselves many favors out of all 5. And I'm a Democrat. So I'm trying to be open-minded, and maybe I'm overly critiquing my own side, which I've been guilty of before. But Bernie Sanders, I thought, opened himself up to 2 new lines of attack. I thought Kamala Harris was not very, didn't come across as very solid on a lot of areas. I think a lot of the spots she was like, well, we'll leave that open for conversation. Amy Klobuchar seemed way out of her element, not out of her league, but out of her element. And that could be because of the nature of where they were at. The other 2, Mayor Pete and Liz Warren, I think, did the best. But I fear that Pete Buttigieg has maybe exposed himself as not policy ready yet, especially when compared to Liz Warren, because that was a big contrast between where he's at and where she's at. And I wonder if she is going to suffer from the same thing Hillary suffered from, and that is being the over-empathetic mom figure.
Well, I think any woman is going to be characterized as that unless they start campaigning as Margaret Thatcher, as the Iron Lady, if they take essentially Betsy DeVos kinds of positions, then people wouldn't say that. But I think that's just Brent, you're echoing a sexist perspective, frankly.
I'm not. I don't feel that way. She's my candidate thus far. I mean, that's how I'm voting. I'm just fearing that she's going to be portrayed that way, and that.
Oh, of course she will be. I mean, so was Hillary.
I don't know that helps us.
But I don't think you can stop that. I mean, the majority of people working in the media are men. Probably the majority of men are sexists, whether they realize it or not, and or whether they proclaim it or not. And that you're always going to see that. I mean, it's
and there's nothing she can do to fix that, Tom?
I think she just needs to keep being herself. I think Liz Warren is doing a really, really good job of being herself, and that's enough. I thought she did a great job last night.
Me too. Her policy is definitely the most advanced for our side. So I love her, but I thought she sounded very empathetic. I kept hearing it, and I kept going, oh, my goodness, I wish I didn't hear that.
The thing that Elizabeth Warren, I think empathy is a good thing. The thing that Elizabeth Warren did last night that none of the other candidates did that I thought was so brilliant was just about every answer included a little mini story. And that storytelling is powerful, powerful, powerful stuff. And she has figured it out, and she's figured out how to use it. And I think in this era of reality TV and all this other stuff, her storytelling ability, I think, is going to be the thing that takes it on. Brent, thank you for the call. George in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Hey, George, you wanted to debate the Civil War?
No, I mean, why did you say that Lincoln should not have fought the Civil War?
Oh, I think he should have fought the Civil War. My wife, at various times over the years, has suggested that, one of the things that is just a fact of history is that when Lincoln decided to fight the Civil War, he thought it was going to last 6 weeks. And he didn't realize 600,000 people were going to die. It was going to last years. It was going to, tear the country apart. And he didn't realize that even though that would be the end of slavery, it really wasn't the end of slavery, and it wouldn't be for another 100 years, or at least that whole spectrum of the scourge of racism and things associated with it, the Jim Crow and whatnot. And so, her take was, the southern states, wanted to go down, they want to go down this path of being basically libertarian paradises. Let them. I'm more sanguine, or less sanguine about that. I think that, Lincoln did what he had to do. I think he did the right thing. And I think keeping the southern states, and Louise is not, this is not some big thing in her pantheon of political positions.
Yeah, but I think she's wrong on that.
I agree.
There were people in slavery.
Yes.
So for him to fight the war was taking some active steps to oppose that.
I agree. Although
that
was not. You'll recall, if you're a student of Civil War history, Lincoln didn't fight the war initially over the issue of slavery. Now the South seceded over the issue of slavery. But that was not Lincoln's thing. Lincoln's thing was you can't break apart the Union, and therefore you can't leave the Union. And in the first year of the war, before he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he was talking about we can reach a compromise here that'll allow slavery to continue to exist in the South.
Well, let me ask you a question about that. Do you think it would have been okay to let those states succeed?
No, as I said, I don't, and I think broadly Louise doesn't. As I think this conversation has.
Tell Louise I don't understand her point.
Okay, I got it, George. Thanks for the call, Grant. And I take representing my wife on the air at some peril here. Grant in Kirkland, Washington. Hey, Grant, what's on your mind?
Good day. I didn't get to see any of this CNN's presentation, and I think the most important subject of the race should be our environment and natural resources. So I was wondering, because I'm not hearing much discussion on your show of it, how they covered it or each of the candidates covered that issue. As
is the case with our media in general. And you're right. We're going to be talking about the environment in the next hour, but we haven't been talking about it a lot here. And probably yesterday on Earth Day, I should have done more. But there were a few questions about the environment raised, and every time the question was raised, the answer was, "This is one of the most important issues that we're dealing with." But I don't, frankly, I don't have a checklist. I don't remember who was asked those questions, and I don't remember any answers that stood out beyond the normal Democratic Party expected response of yes, we need to get back into the Paris Peace Accords. In fact, I think it might have been Kamala Harris who said that, if she was elected president, day one, we would rejoin the Paris Peace Accords. But I may be wrong. It might have been Liz Warren. I'm just not sure. Sean thinks it was Elizabeth Warren.
We would have had a doomsday clock for nuclear arms, and at this point in time, I think that could be replaced with other types of doomsday.
No, I'm with you. Sean watched it last night too, and she said that it was Elizabeth Warren who said that she's got a very specific plan to deal with climate change, and the first, step one, day one, is rejoin the Paris Peace Accords, and then off to the races from there. And in fact, Elizabeth Warren does have a fairly comprehensive policy position. She is on global warming. She is the ultimate policy wonk. Grant, thanks a lot for the call. Well, actually, Grant, we've got 15 seconds here. Have you not been hearing climate change in the media? Is that your concern?
Well, that it should be brought to the forefront as part of everyone's concern.
Yeah, I agree. You've got Jay Inslee, who's basically making himself a single party or a single issue candidate around climate change. But we'll see with the rest. Grant, thanks for the call and thanks for listening to KBCS. We'll be back in 4 minutes. We're going to check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. Pretty sure it's going to be Bob Ney. And then we'll, at the top of the hour, we'll be talking with Paul Gunter, and we'll continue with your calls and our conversation.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stick around. It's talk radio and talk media, actually, TV as well, and podcasting and everything else for the rest of us. Okay, welcome back. David in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, David, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching this on YouTube.
Yeah. Thanks for taking my call. I got to thinking about the impeachment issue, and find myself wondering if the Democrats really understand the position they're in, because for people to get out to the polls, this is a very critical time for them. If they wimp out the way they're notorious for, they're going to lose credibility. So
yeah, here's the debate, David. On the one hand, if the Democrats wimp out and say, no, we're not going to impeach the guy, Donald Trump is going to go full bore on the 14 angry Democrats, and this was an attempted palace coup, and they tried to remove me from office, and I'm going to take these guys down, and the Democrats are going to stand, look like they're standing around, holding hands or twiddling their thumbs or whatever. On the other hand, if the Democrats try to impeach him and they can't get enough votes to remove him from office in the Senate, Donald Trump is again going to claim victory and say, see, here was another attempt. And it's kind of like, heads I win, tails you lose.
No. But what we're overlooking is that we need to know that our dog is in the fight.
Yes.
And the thing is, if they're so afraid of losing power, this may have the effect of them losing credibility and power. So they don't really have a choice, because they're either in there fighting for me or they're just going to give it up. And
I agree with you, David.
Do they really have a choice in the matter? I don't think so.
Yeah.
So put your head down and get in the fight and see it.
And I think they're going in that direction, and they're starting with the hearings, because that's where you have to start in an impeachment. David, thank you for the call. I agree with you. Aaron in Berea, Kentucky. Excuse me. Hey, Aaron, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think Elizabeth Warren did the best in the town halls. She really manages to frame her policies so that everyday Americans can really understand them.
Yeah.
But the questions that Bernie got were just almost laughably dumb, in my opinion.
Well, the questions that Bernie got were clearly intended to produce a soundbite that could be used to take down Bernie.
The headlines that they were putting out almost seconds after he was getting these questions seems like it was, I'm not even going to go there, but
seems like it was a setup.
That's what it seemed like to me.
Well, they knew. See, CNN's producers selected the questions. The students asked the questions, but the students had pre-submitted. There were hundreds and hundreds of questions that were pre-submitted, and the producers went through them and said, "Oh, well, we'll ask these," and they chose the ones that they were going to ask. And the ones that they chose for Amy Klobuchar were, by and large, very, very soft. I mean, there are a number of areas where I think she's very vulnerable, and none of those areas were exposed. The questions that they asked of Bernie were, in my opinion, designed to take him out of the race. They were trying to get a Michael Dukakis, Kitty Dukakis moment there, and Bernie was. I thought his response was brilliant, but the clip of that is being played on network television doesn't include the part of his rebuttal or his response, to the murderers and mass bombers and rapists question. Doesn't include his actual response, which was, this is a slippery slope when you start taking away people's rights to vote. Aaron, thank you for the call. I think your observations are great. We'll be right back with Talk Media News. Stick around. We put together the coolest little newsletter every single day, or every single weekday, every day that we do our show. And Sue Nethercutt is the editor of it, and she does such a brilliant job with this thing. It's absolutely free, by the way. It's, all you have to do is go over to thomhartmann.com and just sign up for it. Sign up for the free newsletter. And we don't sell the list or share it or any of that kind of stuff. So, it's just coming to you, and that's it. And every day, as we're doing the show, Sue is listening to the show, and she is finding the websites for all the articles and all the stories and all the topics, broadly speaking, that I'm talking about on radio and on TV. And then she puts the links in there. We call Sue's Daily Stack, and it's literally a link to every article that I've referenced and every broad topic that I've talked about. I think you'll find it really a valuable asset, particularly to help you win the water cooler wars. So be sure to check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. It's free. It's our newsletter. Thanks a lot.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, the new book by Ellen Ratner. On the line with us is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News from New York, Luke Vargas, who also does a 2-minute podcast every day. Luke, the Trump administration was coercing UN security members to water down this resolution on sexual violence and armed conflicts. This is mind-boggling. The United States is saying, the UN is trying to say that rape should not be a weapon of war, and the U.S. is trying to water it down. What the hell is going on here?
Yeah, this was a pretty shameful day to be an American at the United Nations. I'll say that. I'm especially hearing countries from all over the world, many of which have admittedly pretty bad human rights records, saying things to the effect that stripping language out of a Security Council resolution, as you mentioned, that tries to support victims of sexual violence in conflict from having any mention to their sexual and reproductive health in that resolution is like forcing these women to go through this crime again. In particular, what the U.S. seems to be complaining about is the fact that there were references in this resolution to the phrase sexual and reproductive health, end quote. This was construed by the State Department, not from the U.S. mission to the United Nations, which, bear in mind, there is no U.S. ambassador to the United Nations right now. You have career Foreign Service officers basically running the shop in New York, and you could tell they were basically trying to hold back their anger as they read the statements that were being sent to them from Washington today. But yes, this reference in a resolution to stop sexual violence and conflict that referenced sexual and reproductive health was seen as promoting of abortion, which is a violation of the Mexico City policy, which the administration put into effect very early on after Trump got elected, which basically says the U.S. will fund nothing around the world, no organization, no cause that ever gives women information, let alone carrying out abortions. But even if you inform someone that a safe abortion is something that might be available to them, the U.S. is systematically going around and zeroing out all funding for that. So this finally materialized at the UN Security Council today. And I think what's very upsetting about this, and what you heard a lot of countries, most of the European countries and others complaining about, is that the U.S. for about 25 years actually led the charge in putting language about sexual and reproductive health into Security Council resolutions at a time when a lot of other countries were wary to do that, even some in Europe. And the U.S. is really in the vanguard now. Now we are seeking to undo that language. And I think what's very worrisome, and I'll leave it here, is that there are other countries, China and Russia in particular, who love this idea that long-standing principles of the UN Security Council that had been baked into resolutions over the course of decades could now be undone. These are countries, and I would unfortunately say the U.S. is now among them, that are looking at various bits of language that talk about accountability for various crimes or responsibilities of states to international norms. And the long thinking had been, these are in so many resolutions now, you can't possibly go back. It would be so galling to excise that retroactively. Well, now the U.S. has essentially forced the UN Security Council to do that. It was all the worse, I think, because you had Nadia Murad, a young woman who was raped by the Islamic State in northern Iraq, gave testimony at this briefing today, as did Amal Clooney, who represents many of these victims of sexual violence. And again, the fact that, the U.S. basically held this entire thing hostage with the threat of a veto, so long as these references to female reproductive health for people who've been raped could be taken out, is just embarrassing. And it's one of the worst examples of Trump administration pandering, I think, to conservative Christian interests over global leadership that we've seen in this administration so far.
Yeah, what's so ironic is that George Herbert Walker Bush was a lifetime member and supporter of Planned Parenthood, and Ronald Reagan was pro-choice, aggressively pro-choice, until 1980, when they both basically got in with the religious right in the United States, with the Jerry Falwells and the Franklin Grahams of the world, and said, okay, we'll get rid of abortion if you'll bring your congregations to us, no matter how corrupt we are, no matter what our other positions are, no matter that we want to take medicine away from sick people and food away from hungry people, the stuff that Jesus talked about. We're going to be all about abortion, and the Republican Party has been there ever since. And they've had the religious right with them, and it's bizarre. It's just bizarre. Anyhow, in Myanmar, the country used to be Burma, that has been engaging in a genocide against the Rohingya Muslim minority there that have fled all over the region. They arrested a couple of Reuters reporters. And are those indigenous reporters, or are they foreign reporters?
No, they are Myanmar citizens, which is probably why this is happening. But again, it's quite upsetting. So these Walloon and Kwaso were arrested in December 2017 when the genocide was really underway. They found, through great investigative reporting that won them a Pulitzer last month, evidence that the Myanmar security forces were responsible for some of these massacres against Muslim men. And the government had a prosecution witness who even testified that the police had planted evidence on these reporters in order to accuse them of trying to undermine the state. Now they have lost, as of a few hours ago, their last court appeal, which means this is in our hands to try and use public relations and other sorts of techniques to pressure Myanmar to let them go. But they've exhausted all legal options, which is, again, a very dark day for the press.
Is there anybody in particular we can call, or a website where people can get more information?
Just search. Reuters is doing a great job bringing awareness. I would follow their lead.
Okay, great. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from William Scherer's classic History of the Third Reich, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. This is from Chapter 7, page 188, The Nazification of Germany, 1933 to 34. The theory which Hitler had evolved in his vagabond days in Vienna and never forgotten, that the way to power for a revolutionary movement was to ally itself with some of the powerful institutions in the state, had now worked out in practice pretty much as he had calculated. The president, backed by the army and the conservatives, had made him chancellor. His political power, though great, was, however, not complete. It was shared with these three sources of authority which had put him into office and which were outside and to some extent distrustful of the National Socialist movement. Hitler's immediate task, therefore, was to quickly eliminate them from the driver's seat, make his party the exclusive master of the state, and then with the power of an authoritarian government and its police, carry out the Nazi revolution. He had been in office scarcely 24 hours when he made his first decisive move, springing a trap on his gullible conservative captors and setting in motion a chain of events which he either originated or controlled, and which at the end of just 6 months would bring the complete Nazification of Germany and his own elevation to dictator of the Reich, unified and defederalized for the first time in German history. 5 hours after being sworn in at 5 p.m. on January 3rd, 1933, Hitler held his first cabinet meeting. The minutes of the session, which turned up at Nuremberg among the hundreds of tons of captured secret documents, reveal how quickly and adroitly Hitler, aided by the crafty Goering, began to take his conservative colleagues for a ride. Hindenburg had named Hitler to head not a presidential cabinet, but one based on a majority of the Reichstag, the parliament. However, the Nazis and the Nationalists, the only two parties represented in the government, had only 247 seats out of 538 in parliament and thus lacked a majority. To attain it, they needed the backing of the Center Party with its 70 seats. In the very first hours of the new government, Hitler had dispatched Goering to talk with the centrist leaders, and now he reported to the cabinet that the center was demanding certain concessions. Goering had therefore proposed that the Reichstag be dissolved and new elections held, and Hitler agreed. Hugenberg, a man of wooden mind for all his success in business, objected to taking the center into the government, but on the other hand opposed new elections, well knowing that the Nazis, with the resources of the state behind them, might win an absolute majority at the polls and thus be in a position to dispense with his own services and those of his conservative friends. So he proposed simply suppressing the Communist Party. With its 100 seats eliminated, the Nazis and the Nationalists would have a majority. But Hitler would not go so far at that moment, and it was finally agreed that the Chancellor himself would confer with the Center Party leaders on the following morning, and that if the talks were fruitless, the cabinet would then ask for new elections. Hitler easily made the talks fruitless. At his request, the center leader, Monsignor Kaas, submitted as a basis for discussion a list of questions which added up to a demand that Hitler promise to govern constitutionally. But Hitler, tricking both Kaas and his cabinet members, reported to the latter that the center had made impossible demands and that there was no chance of agreement. He therefore proposed that the president be asked to dissolve the Reichstag and call new elections. Hugenberg and Papen were trapped. After a solemn assurance that from the Nazi leader that the cabinet would remain unchanged, however, the elections turned out, they agreed to go along with him. New elections were set for March 5th. For the first time in the last relatively free election Germany was to have, the Nazi Party would now employ all the vast resources of the government to win votes. Goebbels was jubilant. Now it will be easy, he wrote in his diary on February 3rd, to carry on the fight, for we can call on all the resources of the state. Radio and press are at our disposal. We shall stage a masterpiece of propaganda, and this time, naturally, there is no lack of money. The big businessmen, pleased with the new government that was going to put the organized workers in their place and leave management to run its business as it wished, were asked to cough up. This they agreed to do at a meeting on February 20th at Goering's Reichstag President's Palace, at which Dr. Schott acted as host, and Goering and Hitler laid down the line to a couple of dozen of Germany's leading magnates, including Krupp, von Bohlen, who had become an enthusiastic Nazi overnight, Bosch and Schnitzler of IG Farben, and Vogler, head of the United Steelworks. The record of this secret meeting has been preserved. Hitler began a long speech with a sop to the industrialists. Private enterprise, he said, cannot be maintained in an age of democracy. It is conceivable only if the people have a sound idea of authority and personality. All the worldly goods we possess we owe to the struggle of the chosen. We must not forget that all the benefits of culture must be introduced more or less with an iron fist. He promised the businessmen that he would eliminate the Marxist and restore the Wehrmacht, the German army, which was of special interest to such industries as Krupp, United Steel, and IG Farben, which stood to gain the most from the rearmament. Now we stand before the last election, Hitler concluded, and he promised his listeners that regardless of the outcome, there will be no retreat. If he did not win, he would stay in power, quote, by other means with other weapons, end quote. Goering, talking more to the immediate point, stressed the necessity of financial sacrifices, which surely would be much easier for industry to bear if it realized that the election of March the 5th will surely be the last one for the next 10 years, probably even for the next 100 years. All this was made clear to the assembled industrialists, and they responded with enthusiasm to the promise of the end of the infernal elections, the end of democracy, the end of disarmament. The book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shearer. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air. or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com, and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We have been discussing a whole variety of things today, including what happened at the town halls last night. There were 5 Democratic town halls held on CNN, one after another. Each one was an hour long. Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, and Pete Buttigieg. And, it was fascinating. Louise and I went through a bottle of wine and 2 servings of nachos. It was a long time. And I was, following it on Twitter. A lot of you tweeted a lot of really great thoughts to me. I didn't want to share my thoughts so much. Figured we'd do that on the air today, and we'll do that in just a moment. But first, Paul Gunter is on the line with us. Paul is the director of the Reactor Oversight Project over at beyondnuclear.org. The website, beyondnuclear.org. The Twitter handle, of course, Beyond Nuclear as well. And Paul, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we've talked.
Thank you very much, Tom. Good to hear your voice.
Yeah, back at you. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, apparently has not been taking climate change into consideration when it comes to licensing, regulating, whatever, nuclear power plants. And we're starting to see, because the atmosphere has 6% more moisture in it right now, because it's a degree warmer than it was just a few decades ago, the storms are dropping a whole hell of a lot more water right now, and we're seeing flooding across parts of the United States that have literally never flooded, and worse flooding in areas that are prone to flooding. And in many of those cases, you've got a nuclear power plant in the path. A, did I accurately describe that? And B, why is that a problem?
Well, Tom, the existing reactor fleet here in the United States, we've got 35 reactors that sit below major dams. We've got a whole host of nuclear reactors on the East Coast, and we're about to be nuclear free on the West Coast, but we still have 2 reactors at Diablo Canyon. But these are 1960s, 1970s vintage designs, and when they were constructed, they were using antiquated meteorological data. They were using, the data regarding how we thought of earthquakes 40 years ago. And following Fukushima, suddenly there was a pressure on the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission, actually globally, but the U.S. nuclear industry realized that the plants weren't built to standards that presented as real-world events. Fukushima was, when it was built back in the 1960s, they had a design that was built for a potential tsunami of just a little over 10 feet. That was their probabilistic assessment of what they needed to make Fukushima safe for. They were, of course, hit by a 48-foot tsunami on March 11th, 2011. And so that's what, the difference between a design basis event and a beyond design basis. But what was demonstrated was something well over, but very real, what they built that plant at. And that raised alarms at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and because our safety standards are antiquated. And it set about in motion a rulemaking process that raised issues not only for earthquakes but flooding, but a whole host of other issues. But what they found out was that, and the staff for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission basically said we need to order U.S. nuclear power stations to upgrade. And they went through a rulemaking process for 7 years, essentially. And by 2016, the NRC staff said, we're going to order you to upgrade from the old flood and earthquake standard to a more realistic standard that we feel needs to be met now in a post-Fukushima world. And they published a draft final rule after going through a whole set of public comments that the industry commented on. We commented, and the rule then went before the commission after the public comment period was closed. And what happened was the commission voted not to require those upgrades, but to let the industry essentially go back to the old antiquated standard and meet any upgrade on their own self-assessment and make it voluntary. So
Self-regulation.
It went from an order to voluntary. And it went from what the staff was projecting at about $1.7 million per reactor site to meet the cost of compliance with that draft rule. Under the new commission or rule that was adopted on a 3-2 vote with following party lines with 3 Republicans against 1 Democrat and 1 independent, it reduced the cost to $110,000 per site. So we dropped the cost of safety upgrades that came out of the Fukushima accident to 1/10 what the staff said was needed.
Wow.
So once again, financial margins have superseded safety margins, and based on protecting the U.S. nuclear industry's costs, and making us incredibly vulnerable now, particularly with rising sea levels, which these are going to present unprecedented events, and the industry is not prepared for that.
So how many reactors in the United States do we have in total? And how many of those, as a consequence of these decisions and the changing nature of our climate, how many of those have the potential to spectacularly melt down the way Fukushima did?
Well, there are currently 98 nuclear power stations operating in the United States. We're about to go to 97 in June of 2019 with the closure of one of those coastal reactors in Massachusetts, the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station, which is practically identical to Fukushima Daiichi. These are the General Electric Mark I boiling water reactors. We've got 21 of those GE Mark I's operating in the United States now that are, they're basically vulnerable to the same kinds of explosions and meltdowns that we saw at Fukushima Daiichi because of a bad design. The containment structure, as we've talked about many times on your program, is substandard. We recognized that in 1972, that if these reactors, these GE Mark I's, are faced with a severe accident, volumetrically, they're too small to contain the tremendous heat, pressure, explosive, non-condensable gas, and then behind that, just this huge amount of radiation that would be released in that initial explosion. And but again, rather than raise the safety bars around this particular design, we've consistently seen the industry enter into the commission decision-making through a back door that is essentially in violation of the Administrative Procedures Act, a federal law that guarantees the public, independent experts have a say and a place in the decision-making.
Is this, Paul, we're getting out of time here. Is this something unique to the Trump administration, or has this been going on for a long time?
This has been going, originally it was the Atomic Energy Commission that got caught promoting nuclear power over its regulatory role. When the Nuclear Regulatory Commission took over, we basically saw just a change in window dressing. But it's about to get worse, Tom, because in June, we're going to have 4 of the 5 seats will be Trump-appointed commissioners. So right now we got 3. We got Stephen Burns is going to resign on June 30th, and Trump will make his nomination, and we'll have a 4-1 Trumpster commission.
Oh, my God. Okay, Paul Gunter, Beyond Nuclear is the website. You can read all about it over there, the director of the Reactor Oversight Project at Beyond Nuclear. Paul, thanks a lot for dropping by today.
Yes, no nukes, Tom.
Amen. No nukes. And keep up the good work. It's you're doing God's work there, Paul. Thank you. We'll be back with more of your calls and thoughts on the Democratic town halls last night, the issues of the day, impeachment, all of the above.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And the U.S. saying, no, we're not going to condemn rape as a tool of war. Seriously, today in the U.S. And welcome back. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today? You want to talk about nuclear power?
Yeah, hey, really value Paul and his work.
Yeah, me too.
With him, yes. This goes way, way back. My, oh, my. Ivan Selin, Nuclear Regulatory Commission chairman.
Mm-hmm.
Way back, early 90s. He was telling us, if we didn't understand the value of nuclear power, we need to go back to high school and look at energy, blah, blah. I mean, this goes way back. This kind of hypocrisy. These people need to be held personally accountable for scaling this all back and for convoluting how dangerous nuclear energy plants.
Yeah, am I reading this note right here that you worked in a nuclear power station, Bob?
No. We worked against
against the nuclear
industry.
Power.
We did a lot of work standing up to them at a time when they wanted to build a nuclear energy plant down here and stick it on the Verdigris River. Oh, my goodness. You're going to call it Black Sox.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Not a good idea.
Yeah,
so you guys successfully stopped that?
Well, my father-in-law was a rates analyst for the power company that was trying to prove to the public that it was somehow affordable.
Mm-hmm.
He died at 59.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. This is a long history of convoluted lies on the part of the government, on the part of the nuclear industry, and people who just think, it doesn't matter if we create this waste.
I get it.
And leave behind little pockets of the planet that are uninhabitable.
Yeah, no, these are poisons that will last millions and millions of years. Bob, thank you. Well said. Tom in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I caught some highlights of that town hall yesterday, and I wanted to kind of elaborate on what you brought up earlier on saying that we need to bring a chainsaw to a knife fight. And, everyone knows that this 2020 election is going to be basically framed as un-American, anti-Christian socialist Democrats versus flag-waving Christian real Americans. That is how they're going to frame this, right?
Yep, they already have.
And they already have. And, Americans, the premise here is that Americans don't do nuance. So when that woman who asked Bernie the question and she implied, Bernie, you want to bring Soviet Marxism to America.
Right.
And in other words, Bernie, you're un-American, is what she's saying, right?
That's right. Yeah, that question shocked me.
Yes. No, it didn't shock me. I'm expecting that. That's going to be throughout the whole campaign.
Yeah.
And so we must respond, like you say, we got to bring a chainsaw to a knife fight and understand what this is going to be about. And so what we need to do is say, no, our opposition, the Republicans, they are the un-American ones. You don't have to say it that explicitly, but you have to imply that just like they're implying it. And basically, he invoked FDR's economic rights, but it just in passing, he didn't elaborate, saying that the GOP wants to privatize Social Security, they want to privatize Medicare, and that is un-American.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Well said. And hopefully we'll see Democratic candidates start to take names and kick ass like you're talking about there, Tom. Because if we don't, we're going to lose this next election. Tom, thank you for the call. Spot on. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just FYI, this hour of our program is brought to you by XChair. XChairTom.com is their website. XChairTHOM.com. So back to your comments and thoughts on all these. We've covered so much territory here in the last 2.5 hours. What's on your mind? Doug in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Doug, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? I always love your show.
Thank you.
Listen to Luke Vargas talking earlier about, and you were talking about like how the UN and how we don't want to condemn rape as a weapon.
Right.
I find some hypocrisy here when they go, we have to cut funding to Planned Parenthood because even though the money is like fungible, it goes towards abortion, so we have to stop that. But we give lots of money to Israel, and they have government paid for abortion.
That's correct.
Abortion's legal over there, and it's like single payer. The government's paying for it. So I really got to kind of question why we would give money to a country like that. And if you're worried about the fetuses, how many people, how many children have we killed and expecting mothers over in Yemen?
Yes.
It's a bunch of hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And that's really what I wanted to say.
There are literally millions of people facing starvation in Yemen, most of them children, as a consequence of this brutal war. Yeah, the Saudi Arabia has declared against them that we have been supporting, and that Trump just vetoed a resolution that passed both the House and the Senate with Democrats and Republicans saying no more money, no more weapons to Saudi Arabia. And his veto, it can't be overturned.
I believe Bernie actually sponsored that bill.
Yeah. Oh, really? I didn't know that. It wouldn't surprise me because he's been all over this issue with the Saudis forever. Doug, thank you for the call. Charisse in Poulsbo, Washington. Hey, Charisse, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I appreciate the conversations about nuclear power, but I'm kind of frustrated that nobody ever talks about the cost in fossil fuels and things like that to mine the uranium, the big rigs and the huge dump trucks and bringing it over here from Australia and turning it into fuel rods and all that kind of thing. It's like the natural gas with all the fracking and all the costs of that nobody's
on this show, a couple of years ago, Helen Caldicott said that a nuclear power plant...
My hero.
Say what?
She's my hero.
Yeah, not mine too. And she said that a nuclear power plant doesn't produce its first kilowatt of carbon-free energy until the 17th or 18th year of its life.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how carbon-intensive all the processes are that are involved in building a nuclear power plant and mining the uranium and refining the uranium and transporting the uranium. And then afterwards, dealing with the waste, the nuclear waste, which doesn't just sit in a pool. You have to have electric pumps continuously recirculating the water in that pool. And they have to be provided by a grid that's outside the nuclear power plant, because if the plant goes down, you don't want the pool to blow up.
Which is usually coal.
Right.
It's usually coal doing that, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, or, whatever the local power source is. But in the United States, the majority of that is coal or oil, or in some cases, natural gas now. And yeah, I totally agree with you, Cherise. Excellent point and very well said. Thank you very much. Doug in Carlton, Washington. Hey, Doug, what's on your mind?
Well, Tom, thank you very much. I got to say, I've been listening to you for a long time, and I've always enjoyed. You're my champion in any debate.
Well, thank you, Doug. That said, we only have a minute until we're going to hit a hard break.
I'll be really quick, and I'll get off the line.
A minute and a half.
I got a chance with my wife to travel through the Southwest, Arizona, Southern California, that all winter long.
Yep.
I am not afraid to approach people and talk to them and such. And what I found is that there is a huge people have they don't know about socialism. They don't understand, and it's such a negative term to them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling like the Democratic Party they really have to zero in on that because people don't understand.
It's only going to be an issue, Doug.
And I always bring up the Commons and ask them what would they do with the Commons.
Doug, socialism is only going to be an issue if Bernie is the candidate. And, that's up in the air right now. So I'm not so concerned about that, number one. And number two, well, I guess that's that. And number two, it's I know what I was going. This whole I hate socialism stuff is largely isolated to people who are over 40 or 50 years old. Young people actually prefer socialism over capitalism.
Right. So I still think there's a huge education because people have to understand the total benefits because of what they get. They don't seem to understand what they get out of it.
Yeah. No, and there was that question last night. CNN, again, their producers choose these questions, and one of the questions asked to Bernie was, you support socialism like caused the Soviet Union to kill millions of people. How can you support that? And Bernie has never, ever supported communism. I mean, that it was bizarre. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So, do you think the Democrats should impeach? What did you think about the town hall last night? Who impressed you and who depressed you if you watched the town halls on CNN? For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglas lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglas was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglas was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So apparently earlier today, Jared Kushner was at this Time 100 summit, and he said that the investigation into his collusion with Russia, that investigation was more destructive to America than the actual interference by Russia in our election. And he described that interference as, quote, a couple of Facebook ads. This, Seth Abramson is tweeting, this is what happens when you go light on career criminals. They go on television and brag that everything they did is just fine. Nothing to see here. No droids in this car. And that's exactly true. And this is why you have to hold people to account. if they're, particularly if they're not at the very least admitting that they committed a crime and apologizing and trying to make good on it, this is mind-boggling. Gene in Myerstown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gene, you had some thoughts on the town halls last night?
Yeah, this is Ingrid, and it is Myerstown.
Oh, Ingrid, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I only watched the first three, and nothing changed in my opinions. I like Elizabeth and Bernie an awful lot, but I'm very angered about these stupid questions for Bernie. What was it? I guess it was Fox maybe the week before, or MSNBC keeps flirting with this too, this socialism thing.
Yeah.
And then the money questions at Bernie all the time. I mean, come on. Who in their right mind would really believe that Bernie's going to change his positions and not be willing to pay his fair share of taxes? I mean, I'm just so sick of it. It made CNN, in my opinion, look like Dumbos.
Yeah. Well, it made them look like part of the herd that wants to take down Bernie. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
And they were kind of with Elizabeth Warren, they were less aggressive, but it was still pushing the boundaries on the one hand. On the other hand, when in a venue like that, you ask somebody like Bernie Sanders, who actually can answer those questions, you ask them tough questions, you get tough answers. I mean, it may shut down or make it harder for the Republicans, if Bernie is the nominee, to run against him as a Soviet, basically, because he's not. And that was the question that was asked last night. How can you support the Soviet Union, basically, or Soviet style?
That was terrible.
I know it was shocking, frankly, that the CNN producers chose to highlight that question, to have that person stand up and ask that question that way. It was absolutely shocking.
Bernie handled it well.
He did, and he handled the
well.
entire evening well, I thought, and so did Elizabeth Warren. Thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Mickey in Ormond Beach, Florida. Hey, Mickey, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I want you to know you're the best.
Thanks.
My question is, can you explain Amy Klobuchar's difference of her health care plan compared to the other candidates?
I don't. What I heard last night was that she was saying that she didn't have a health care plan, that she wanted to maintain Obamacare. She wanted to repair Obamacare, put it back together, and then add the public option to it. And that over time, people would use that public option more and more and more, and that would ultimately lead us to something like a Medicare for All program. And I think that's largely true, by the way. I think that if the public option had been there in the get-go, that by now we would have, many more people certainly on either Medicare or Medicaid, whichever one turned out to be the public option. But that's my understanding of what she said, Mickey.
Yeah, well, and she's not my candidate. I love Elizabeth, but I thought what she said was making sense, and I'm like, well, we want what's best.
Yeah. Well, she's taking the position that the health insurance companies should be allowed to survive for a while, too. And the largest and most toxic of all of them is United Healthcare, and they're headquartered right there in Minnesota, which is the state that Amy represents. I have no idea what her relationship with them is, if there is any at all. And I don't know if that's informing her perspective on healthcare. I'm willing to give her the benefit of the doubt and assume that it's not. But it is.
Right. But
that would have been an interesting question. What's your relationship with United Healthcare, and how does that color your take on healthcare?
Yeah, but what if all those people get fired that work there?
Well, when the buggy whip manufacturers went out of work, people who were making buggy whips went off and made cars. I mean, if you've got people who have, if you've got people who've got a good skill set in terms of dealing with insurance claims, and you're gonna have to hire a couple 100,000 people over in Medicare and Medicaid, and you're gonna lose a couple 100,000 people over at United Healthcare and Aetna, it seems like a wash to me. I mean, there may be a few people who are out of work, but there's probably a lot of them who are ready to retire anyway. So, I'm not. It's not that I'm celebrating that somebody who works at United Healthcare may lose their job, but I don't think that it's going to have that kind of impact on the economy. The people who say that it is are just being, in my opinion, shills for the banksters who call themselves health insurance companies. Mickey, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Steve, I don't have a city for you. Where are you calling from? Steve, watch on YouTube?
New York City.
I'm sorry?
New York City.
York City, okay. In Pennsylvania?
No, New York City.
Oh, New York City. Okay, I got it. Steve, what's up?
So actually, there's many options. Indian Point nuclear power plant north of Manhattan once used thorium. And thorium is an option better than maybe uranium. And also, I believe there's a conspiracy to suppress free energy.
Yeah.
Free energy could be be a real thing. I've seen experiments, free energy experiments. I witnessed them. I've done them myself. I made a light bulb illuminate itself without any energy.
Well, if you can take that to scale, you can make a fortune. With regard to thorium, just like uranium, has to be mined, it has to be transported, it has to be refined. There's a lot of fossil fuel involved in it, and I'm just, I'm not buying thorium right now. But thanks for the call, Steve. Joe in Cupertino, California. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind?
Thank you, Tom. Well, this is really interesting. I got to watch it with my family, this debate last night. We enjoyed quite a bit of it. But I didn't really get my mind changed. I mean, I don't really want to grade any of the employees, but I know who I'm supporting, and Elizabeth Warren came out really strong as a contender to Bernie, but there was a good debate. But the bigger question here, and I'm just a student of your school here, you taught me about this. It said, the world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it will never forget what we did here.
That's from Lincoln.
I cannot see a president lying in state. His name is Donald Trump. I mean, I just can't see it. I don't want him buried at Arlington Cemetery. I'm just embarrassed by this president. I don't see how you can I'm going to ask you a question. Do you get to be, if you're impeached successfully, do you get to be buried in Arlington Cemetery and enjoy all of the privileges afforded to George Bush, and see if
that's not what happened with Richard Nixon. But frankly, I don't know what the rules are, Joe. I'm sorry.
But he didn't get impeached. Nixon didn't get impeached. My father was rolling in his grave. They never did it to him. So, of course.
Well, he did resign, though. I mean, it's.
But he got a library. So, do we get a Trump library? And does Trump get to lie in state? To go to Arlington?
I'm sure there'll be a Trump library. It's like, maybe it'll be, old copies of Playboy magazine, but there'll be a Trump library.
If you want to motivate the American people, just bring out this, because it's going to happen. One of our great presidents is about 90 years old at this point, and he's going to be an embarrassment. And I don't want Trump to benefit from his ill-gotten gains, I guess, is the way Lincoln tried.
I absolutely understand where you're coming from, Joe. Joe, thank you for the call. Lawrence in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Hey, Lawrence, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I want somebody to explain to me how the Mueller team could not find collusion or clear evidence of collusion between Trump's campaign, and Russia, when the campaign manager, Paul Manafort, met with Klimnik, the oligarch that's such good friends with Putin, and turned over internal Republican polling data to him, and met with him not once, but several times to discuss strategy to get to the Electoral College votes in the Midwest.
Right.
How is that not collusion?
It looks like collusion to me, and we probably shouldn't even use the word collusion because it's not a legal term. The word is conspiracy to defraud the United States, or conspiracy. And that certainly appears to me like a conspiracy. Mueller was taking the most conservative position possible. He was, and he was also taking the position that he could not prosecute. In any case, he couldn't prosecute the president or indict the president. So, this is why Congress needs to have hearings. This is why exactly that issue, Manafort's conversations with the Russian oligarch, where he said, basically we could use some help in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and surprise, and those things need to be in front of the American people. The Mueller report is going to be read by a few thousand people. I mean, that's it, literally a few thousand people. Excuse me, maybe 100,000 people at the most will actually read it. It might sell 1 million copies, but most people don't read the book. Only about 3% of people who buy books actually read the whole book. It's not going to be read by people, but the information in it, as you point out, Lawrence, is absolutely startling. It's stark. It's amazing. This is why when Elizabeth Warren had a long airplane ride and she read the Mueller report, she was so shocked, she came out the next day and said, okay, that's it. Impeach these guys. This is wrong. This is criminal behavior. We can't put up with it. And that's why, in my opinion, Jerry Nadler in the Judiciary Committee needs to convene an impeachment hearing. This is not necessarily to impeach the president. It's to determine whether there's enough evidence that the president is guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors worthy of impeachment. And, we may decide no, but we need to have that process. I'm with you, Lawrence. Thank you for the call. And thanks for listening to SiriusXM. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and thoughts and the news of the day. Stick around. And welcome back. Bob in Skokie, Illinois. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good afternoon. A couple of real quick thoughts. Number one, I agreed with you about Elizabeth Warren's power with her stories. I work in the research field, and it's really being emphasized more and more to people who do market research and such that the best way to make your point and to have it heard is to wind a story.
And to have it remembered. And to have it remembered, Bob. I mean, that's
that too.
This story is how we historically conveyed cultural information. The little boy who cried wolf, the little boy who pointed out that the emperor had no clothes. These are stories that contain the essence of the underpinnings of our culture. This is how we communicate information to our children, to ourselves.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Second point. And I don't really want to get into a debate about it, but I have a real concern about what Bernie's going to be up against if he wins the Democratic nomination, because I think you saw last night what the Republicans are going to throw at him.
Yep.
But imagine the impact of all the advertising and all the things online in particular, even American-made stuff, that is going to basically brand him as a socialist and show him with...
Bob, that's going to happen to whoever the Democratic nominee is. If the Democratic nominee was Amy Klobuchar, she's going to be branded as a communist and a socialist.
Well,
it's going to happen no matter what.
Well, he might be a little bit easier to target. And third, and real quick, I think the idea that having basically hearings and having the American public hear what they have not read, because you're right, you just talked about 100,000 people perhaps actually taking the time to read the Mueller report. But if the newspapers and the live coverage of hearing Don McGahn tell the story of his dealings with Trump and such is going to be very powerful. And taking that, let's say that he does get impeached, okay? When you take that into the Senate and you put it in front of Susan Collins and Joni Ernst and Cory Gardner and a bunch of other
and Mitt Romney.
Senators, I mean, they're going to be under the gun because they're in states where they could the balance could be tipped in the Democrats' favor if they steadfastly stand up and support Trump after the way a lot of people are going to really change their minds about what this guy's really all about.
It's going to be all or nothing, Bob. This is like tipping points in climate change. Once you hit that breakover point, once probably it'll be 51, 52, 53% public opinion in support of impeachment. Once you hit that point, you're going to see a couple of Republican senators go, okay, that's it. I'm in favor of impeachment. And then the dominoes are going to come crashing down, in my opinion. That's how it's going to play out. And there's an enormous pent-up desire among Republicans to abandon and get rid of Trump and replace him with Mr. Conventional Republican Mike Pence. And that should be obvious, I think, to everybody, although the media kind of ignores it and pretends it's not there. But look at all the wars that are going on inside the Republican Party. I mean, they never get discussed. The media likes to have a narrative about wars in the Democratic Party, but in fact, the Republican Party is where the real shooting wars are going on, metaphorically speaking.
Tom, have a great day.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bob. Good to hear from you, and great topics to bring up. I appreciate it. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. The place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person, or General Motors, or Goldman Sachs, or Bank of America? No, they're not. They're corporations. Come on, they should not have rights of personhood. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Corey in Seattle. Hey, Corey, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Hey, so I didn't actually hear about these town halls until this morning on the news. So I went to look it up today, and I'm just letting you know I can't find the full town hall for any of the candidates. And it seems like CNN has links to their website, or they just have like little clips and takes. And, as much as you can, I think it's best to listen to the whole thing and hear it from the horse's mouth instead of just someone's take. So,
yeah, it's unfortunate.
If you know anywhere where you can watch the full video, if any of your listeners know where
I don't. It wouldn't surprise me if there are bootleg versions of it on YouTube. They probably won't last very long because of copyright violations, but typically that's where you find those kinds of things. There's a bootleg version right now of David Attenborough's climate thing from BBC, and BBC hasn't yet figured it out. But yeah, they were definitely worth watching, Corey, and I would say check that out. Thanks for the call. Beth in Cypress, California. Hey, Beth, what's on your mind today?
What's on my mind is I would like to begin impeaching with Mnuchin, then Pence, then Robert Barr, and remove his license.
Yeah, it's Bill Barr. It's William Barr, but Bob Barr is the Georgia congressman. I'm constantly screwing them up on the air, which is probably where you got it from, Beth, because I used to know Bob Barr.
I get it all the time. I just think that I would like to hear impeachment hearings on these people.
Yes, I agree.
We, the people, like it, we listen to it, and we learn from it.
Yeah.
And yes, I did record all of the town hall meetings, and I have my choices and favorites. Love Elizabeth, and I do like Bernie.
Yeah.
But there's more people to like and more things to love and more things to find out.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hoping that people listening to me saying, wait a minute, let's just have those hearings in order and figure out what's wrong with the whole swamp.
Yeah, I'm with you. Beth, thank you for the call. Carson in Arlington, Virginia. Hey, Carson, what's up? Carson? Listening on Sirius XM? No, Carson. Let's try Eric in Auburn, Washington, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I am wondering, and I have only read a small portion of the report, but it seems to me that since Mueller's team was investigating Russian interference, that it would have made total sense for them to dig into all sorts of very specific information about the voting machines and the processes in the key battleground states, especially where, Manafort was providing information to Klimnik. Right. And I'm wondering, did they? Because it seems to me that those 80,000 votes which swung the Electoral College, that is so key to determining what happened there, because that right there could totally negate Trump's victory.
Yes, I agree. And the question: were the voting machines hacked, or were the election tabulators hacked? Right. Exactly what happened. To the best of my knowledge, the Mueller report, the Mueller Commission did not investigate any of that. I've read the commission report, or at least probably 80% of it now. And I see no reference to that anywhere, and I've seen no reference to it in the footnotes. Now, maybe I've missed it, and if I have, if anybody knows that, please call me and correct me. But to the best of my knowledge, no, they did not. In fact, we've got, as a nation, this whole policy, we've had it since 2002, of see no evil, speak no evil, and hear no evil with regard to voting machines and the possibility that they may be vulnerable to hacks. And I think it's frankly a crime against democracy. Eric, thank you. You raised a really important point. Jennifer in Stillwater, Minnesota, listening on AM 950. Hey, Jennifer, what's up?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to say that everybody noticing that Bernie was getting horrible questions from CNN, it's probably because they just hired that Sarah Isagor, the one who was Jeff Sessions' spokeswoman. She worked for the Trump campaign.
Oh, right, and she's supposed to oversee their election coverage.
Yes, she's in charge of CNN's 2020 presidential campaign coverage, and they just hired her. She's described as a GOP operative, right. Sarah Isagor, ISGUR. If you look at the Share Blue article from February, she worked for Jeff Sessions. She attacked
Did she
Hillary
actually get that job? I mean, I thought when it was announced that there was enough blowback that they that she backed out or they withdrew it, but apparently not.
I don't think so. If you Google around, it looks like she got the job. But that's the
Amazing.
answer to the question. I don't even have cable TV, so
Yeah.
I'm just listening to all you guys. So.
Yeah, well, you may well be right, Jennifer. That makes a lot of sense. Jennifer, thank you for that, and thanks for the reminder. I had reported that here when it first came out, but anyhow. Elliot, you got the last question of the day. We've got about a minute. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for getting me in, Tom. You know, I did watch most of the debates last night, and I have a question. I have a comment and a question. And it seems to me the most important issue is campaign finance, because global warming, big pharma, banking, screwing the consumers, sorry for the language, it's not going to happen until money is no longer being paid for.
I agree. I agree.
And Bernie talked about it, and Buttigieg. I didn't.
Yeah,
hear
Buttigieg actually called for an amendment to the Constitution to say corporations are not people and money is not speech. I mean, that blew my mind. I've not heard that from any. You know, Bernie's been calling for that for years, although he doesn't. It's not part of his stump speech, I don't think. But Buttigieg, really.
Right. I thought he was. I thought that. Yeah. And my question is, did Mueller say that the reason that he couldn't find obstruction is because he can't indict a sitting president?
No, he said that the reason he didn't make specific indictment recommendations is because he can't indict a sitting president. He said explicitly that the reason he couldn't find the proof of the collusion was because Don Jr. was using WhatsApp. They were Manafort. There's so many of these guys were using these apps that delete the messages that there were, which is against the law, or a bad thing, I guess, when you're committing a crime. And he couldn't find it. So many documents were destroyed, the burn bags in the White House, all this stuff, all this unconventional stuff, that basically they buried it so deep that he couldn't find it. He couldn't prove it. And again, that's something that Congress can undertake. Okay, let's unbury some of this stuff. Thanks so much for being with us today. It's been a great day. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires your assistance, your participation. You're it.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Archives.